Chapter 957. The cavalry formation was quickly penetrated by Yu Zhang, but Yu Zhang did not stay idle. The cavalry on the left saw the situation and did not charge recklessly under the command of their leader. Instead, they continued to lead the cavalry and threw their spears one after another. Most of the spears that pierced Yu Zhang's body either slipped or fell on the road, while some that did not pierce Yu Zhang were nailed into the frozen ground. Yu Zhang wanted to tease Bailiang and let them see his Vajra physique, so he stood still. After the spear forest, the cavalry on the right followed up with a rain of arrows. Yu Zhang's body was completely unharmed except for his tattered clothes. Although Yu Zhang seemed to be careless, he was in fact silently accumulating strength, trying to climb to the peak in one go before the battle. It was not that he could not continue to tease a group of rats, but it was better to be safe than sorry. If there was a martial arts master hidden in the cavalry and he attacked when Yu Zhang's chi was weakened, although he would not be defeated, if he lost even a little bit of face, who knew if the vicious young master behind him would vent his anger on him when he was bored. Serving this young master was more tiring than serving his ancestors. His heart was filled with hatred. If he could have a higher realm than that handsome young man, Li Zhang, who had always scoffed at famous scholars, would not mind changing his taste. But Yu Zhang knew very well that this kind of ruthless revenge, which made him feel comfortable, was not something he could count on in this life. Unless that person was suddenly beaten to the ground by an immortal, then he would have the chance to kick him when he was down. However, the northern Liang path had already produced the old god of swords Li Chungang, and Qin Zhibao had already defected to the capital. Only the junior brother of the spear Immortal Wang Xiu and Yuan Zuozong, who was the commander of the border cavalry, were left. Could these two top masters still join hands and appear here? Although the 100-man cavalry on the courier road had been pierced through, they quickly resumed their charge. At the foot of the mountain, 100-man cavalry under Huang Xiaokuai's personal command had also joined the battle. The 100-man cavalry on the left and right sides of the mountain switched between crossbows and javelins. Even though they were unable to achieve anything against a Vajra realm expert, their formation was tight and their performance was far better than Ma Jinchai's frozen field cavalry. The fearless Yu Zhang let out a long breath, the fog lingering around him. He stretched out his arms and twisted his wrist joints. As if he was annoyed by the noise of the horse's hooves, he stomped on the ground, the dull rumbling sound faintly covering the sound of the hooves. Yu Zhang stomped on the road, the momentum gradually growing, rumbling like thunder. The horses on the road rose and fell more violently, but still no one was afraid of the battle. The political strife in northern Liang, especially the strife in the military, had always been disdained by the pillars of the imperial court of Liang as a farce in the countryside. If they could not gain the upper hand in the argument, they would roll up their sleeves and start a brawl. Compared to the imperial court and the capital, where the imperial court's imperial edicts had been passed down for generations, how could northern Liang, which had been built in just 20 years, catch the eye of the imperial court's big shots? However, it seemed that many of the pillars of the imperial court had forgotten that the Liang imperial court had the cultural heritage of the Bailiang cavalry. The impoverished Bailiang also had the unique heritage of the Bailiang cavalry. Dong Yueqi was not a good cavalry, but people like Wang Ji, Ren Chunyun, Zhu Boyu, Huang Xiaokuai, and so on, who were not even qualified to be seen by the pillars of the imperial court, were all doing well. Yu Zhang wanted to break a few spines of Bailiang with his own hands. Of course, he did not know about the heritage of the torch and was too lazy to think too much about it. However, the cavalry in front of him was different from the others. He felt very uncomfortable. It was not easy for him to become a level 1 expert, but in the end he had to work like a cow or a horse for a junior. Now that he was in Bailiang, he had to vent his anger. Yu Zhang stared at the cavalry general who was wearing colorful armor and had unsheathed his cold saber. Yu Zhang's vigorous chi filled his entire body. He felt like he could take a sword from an immortal. Yu Zhang's spirit was at its peak. His wild laughter echoed throughout the post-house as he collided with the cavalry general. When they were 50 steps apart, he leaped up high, stretched out his long arms and punched down. The Bailiang commandant, Huang Xiaokuai, who was leading the charge, blocked with his saber horizontally. The Bailiang commandant's saber suddenly sank, and the warhorse's hooves were instantly crushed by the unstoppable force of thousands of pounds. The edge of the Bailiang commandant's saber only managed to squeeze out a trace of blood from the man's fist. Huang Xiaokuai held his saber in one hand and the back of his saber in the other, but he was still powerless to stop this Jianghu villain's punch. He swallowed a mouthful of blood and abandoned his horse to move to the side. His saber brushed past the man's fist, but it was still unable to cut the man's skin. The commandant's commandant beside him pierced his spear at the same time, accurately aiming for Yu Zhang's left eyeball, forcing him to stop chasing after their commandant. Another commandant threw his spear at Yu Zhang's crotch. This was the first time Yu Zhang frowned. The essence of killing a Vajra realm expert was nothing more than the 4 words, "The truth will come to light." Only after exhausting the chi that flowed endlessly like water and losing the perfect and flawless invincible Vajra would half the battle be won. If an expert was given enough time to take a breather, slowly replenish the chi and restore the chi in his body, he would have to start all over again. However, the accumulation of an expert's chi was always easier to disperse than to gather. The chi could travel for hundreds of miles in an instant. This legendary realm of Earth Immortals was something that even the Vajra realm and Finger Shen realm experts could only dream of. For example, Yu Zhang's chi had fallen to 80% after 2 consecutive attacks. He allowed the rain of arrows and spears to rain down on him without moving an inch, and only managed to recover to 90% using a clumsy method. The reason why the Jianghu people regarded the death of the Sword Emperor of Shishu as a tragic death was not purely because they felt pity for the expert who was crushed into a pile of minced meat. It was more because this Grandmaster Swordsman, for the sake of his worthless family name, guarded the gates of the imperial city of Shishu all by himself. The enemy he faced was a tide of locust cavalry, and he had no chance to catch his breath at all. He could only rely on his last breath to fight to the death. It was as if he was watching himself walk step by step on the road to the underworld. However, Yu Zhang merely furrowed his brows. He was only facing 100 riders. He casually pushed aside the blinding spear of the commandant, and with a tap of his toes, he stepped on the iron spear thrown by the rider and used the momentum to knee the commandant in the head. Yu Zhang stood on the back of the warhorse. The warhorse continued to gallop forward. Yu Zhang stood proudly on the top of the mountain, and for some reason he felt a tightness in his chest. A rider was slowly descending the mountain. Faster and faster. Far behind Yu Zhang, the peach blossom fan was closed with a snap. The vermilion rope with the other end of the white scabbard on the young man's wrist was suddenly pulled taut. As the rider descended the mountain, the young man in black sensed that he was being watched by someone on the mountain. He muttered to himself, "Is there such a hidden expert in Bailiang? Why hasn't Zhao Guo's records mentioned him before?" Yu Zhang's scalp went numb as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. He was scared out of his wits. The sleeves of the rider fluttered in the wind. From the cuffs of his sleeves to his arms, there were countless red threads coiling around them, as if they were scarlet snakes crawling all over them. In the past there had been such a red snake, cat riding towards Yu Zhang leisurely. Yu Zhang, who had been hit in the ribs, seemed to have gone mad. With a pained expression, he squatted on the back of the horse and hooked his fingers into his scalp. Then he raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. He clenched his teeth and slapped the warhorse to death. Then he rushed towards the rider. The pro cavalry at the foot of the mountain and on the road stopped their horses subconsciously, leaving the rider and the unstoppable unknown Jianghu martial artist to fight. The rider floated down from his horse and continued to move forward. The pair, who had been expected to fight fiercely for a few hours, brushed past each other just like that. His sleeves turned even redder. It turned out that he was holding a bloody human skin that had been peeled from head to toe. The 300 riders on the road widened their eyes in unison as they watched His Highness, who was carrying a fresh bag of skin, pass by. He stopped in front of the young man who was no longer waving his fan and casually tossed the human skin into the air. Huang Xiaokuai would never forget this scene for the rest of his life. His Royal Highness, who had an ordinary Bailiang saber on his waist, was up against the crossing the river that was not inferior to the Nanhua saber. Chapter 958. The two captains of Tongmen Pass looked at each other in dismay. Wei Shaking and Xn Yinma's horizons were much higher than normal soldiers. They were even more shocked by His Royal Highness's method of killing people. The reason why it was called a magnificent feat was because there were usually military experts like Wei Xian hidden among the cavalry. The rule of Jianghu to measure the level of martial arts by the number of armor pieces was actually not accurate. After all, iron armor was a dead object, while the person wearing the armor was a living person with martial arts skills. They also had their own circulation of qi. Wei Shaking glanced at Lingzhou's deputy general Su Yambing from the corner of his eyes. This retainer of the king of Bailiang, who was carrying an iron spear without tassels, had urged his horse to take a few steps forward. He looked at the post house in the distance. There were a few strands of light purple flowing light moving around the tip of his spear. On the other hand, the other deputy general Han Laoshan, who was always beside them, seemed to be somewhat surprised. He shook the reins of his horse and urged his horse to come to the side of his fellow disciple, Su Yanbing. He asked softly, "What's going on?" Han Laoshan, the mysterious finger, saw clearly what happened on the post house. However, this spear Immortal Wang Xiu's junior martial brother was curious as to how His Royal Highness did it. The Jianghu man with the physique of the first stage Vajra realm charged directly at His Royal Highness. In the end, His Royal Highness took a punch head-on. His Royal Highness took the opportunity to let the scarlet snake crawl onto the man's body, like snow melting into the surface of the blazing fire in the furnace. The reason why the Vajra realm was called the unbreakable Vajra realm was because the chi in the body and the physique were tempered. The two merged together seamlessly. His Royal Highness's sleeves were densely covered with scarlet snake-shaped red ropes. In an instant, they blocked the acupoints of the first stage martial artist's body. In addition, the man did not care about anything else. Not only did he hope to use brute force to break free from the scarlet snake, he also wanted to crush the scarlet snake in one go. The chi in his body, which could be said to be at its peak, was like adding firewood to the furnace. Due to the chi acupoints being blocked, the toughness of the red ropes was far beyond imagination. As a result, the furnace was on the verge of collapse, unable to withstand the boiling water. When the martial artist was on the verge of death and still failed to kill the enemy who was close to him, he finally realized that his chi and physique had been forcibly separated. Finally, he regained some clarity. However, by the time he came to his senses, it was already too late to stop. Before the martial artist died, he indeed had some courage that made Han Laozhan take notice of him. He risked his life and finally smashed out with both fists, one on His Royal Highness's chest and the other on his middle dantian. Even Han Laozhan admitted that he could not be as steady as His Royal Highness. It could be said that the overly conceited martial artist had killed himself. However, His Royal Highness's red ropes and the two supernatural powers that made the fists disappear like clay oxen in the sea were the real key. From an outsider's point of view, the first stage martial artist did not seem to be a match for His Royal Highness. However, Han Laozhan was well aware of the treacherous nature of the situation. Su Yambing had been staring at the young master fanning himself the entire time. He said calmly, "Laozhan, you don't know this. When Li Chungang taught His Royal Highness the two-sleeve green snake, it was not an armchair strategist. Instead, he actually smashed hundreds of two-sleeve green snakes into His Royal Highness's body, giving His Royal Highness the opportunity to comprehend the essence of the path of the sword on his own. His Royal Highness once told me that at that time, other than learning the sword, he also wanted to polish the great yellow court that the Wudong sect leader had instilled in him. Using His Royal Highness's words, using the two-sleeve green snake to beat himself was not some stone from another mountain to polish jade, but to use the jade of another mountain to polish the stone was somewhat of a reckless waste of natural resources. Later, His Royal Highness had the only remaining great yellow court golden lotus seedling pulled out by the celestial phenomenon expert Lu Haoshi. However, Lu Haoshi had indeed pulled out the seedling's tendons and lotus leaves, but the pond where the purple gold lotus was cultivated and nurtured was still there. Most importantly, the roots were still there. His Royal Highness said that with his internal energy alone, no matter how hard he cultivated, he would not be able to make the decaying roots grow again. It was only after he had lost the Great Yellow Court that he learned of the old sect leader Wang Zhongluo's gift. The Great Yellow Court cultivation that was close to the celestial phenomenon level of internal energy was secondary. The unremarkable pond was the most precious. It was like a lotus pond. The scene of the lotus spreading across the surface of the water was very beautiful. However, without the pond, there would be no way to talk about the scene of the lotus growing out of the mud without being tainted. Therefore, on this trip, he once again used the stupid method of using a stone from another mountain to polish jade. He used the shady business of using an external force to stir up the muddy water in the pond. For this reason, His Royal Highness suffered quite a few beatings along the way. I don't know how His Royal Highness found out that the boorish man of the pugilistic world had a grudge with Han Diaoxi, so he purposely used the human cat's trick to provoke him into attacking with all his might. The fiercer the attacks of a first-grade martial artist, the more beneficial it is for His Royal Highness. As for why His Royal Highness is so proficient in skinning the human cat, I don't know either. Han Laozhan lamented, although it is beneficial to one's cultivation, every punch is on the flesh. Moreover, it is the final struggle of a Vajra realm expert. It is not easy to hit him. Su Yambing smiled and said, to His Royal Highness, he is already used to it and calls it a common occurrence. Moreover, no matter how painful it is still better than the two-sleeved green snake that the old god of swords, Li Chungang, casually threw out back then. Wei Shaking moved closer and asked cautiously, General Su, is the pugilistic world expert who died in the hands of His Royal Highness really a first-grade expert? Su Yanbing nodded and said with a calm expression, "How many experts have died in the hands of His Royal Highness?" Wei Shaking secretly swallowed his saliva and didn't dare to say another word. Han Laoshan asked, "Then His Royal Highness is going to have another battle with that self-proclaimed romantic young man?" Su Yanbing shook his head and said slowly, "Among the 4 realms of the first grade, only the Vajra realm is suitable for tempering one's physique. Any higher and it is very likely that the gains will not make up for the losses. That young man is already at the Finger Mystery realm. Laoshan, you are also at the Finger Mystery realm. You should know that the Finger Mystery realm of a pugilistic martial artist is vastly different from the first-grade Finger Mystery realm of a Taoist Jinren. In terms of the degree of fierceness in killing people, the same realm is like a capital official and a local high-ranking official of the same rank. The actual authority in the hands of the latter far surpasses the former. How can a 4th-grade official of a low-ranking government office in the capital have more authority to kill than the governor of a local county? Among the 4 realms, the Finger Mystery realm is neither high nor low, but it has the most number of secret techniques. Unless it is an earthly immortal or a celestial phenomenon realm expert, no one would dare to say that they can win against an unfamiliar Finger Mystery realm expert. Today, even if His Royal Highness wants to personally test the background of that person, I, Su Yanbing, will also intervene. The Su Fengnian of Jianghu can take the risk, but His Royal Highness of Beiliang can't. Han Laoshan smiled and said, "That's good. Otherwise, if that guy is really killed by His Royal Highness, those military officers won't have anything to do. We can't let these officials come here and eat the northwest wind." On the Post Road. Chapter 959. Putting away his folding fan, the young master who had his crossing the river knife pulled on the reins and lightly dodged the bloody human skin. Indifferent to the movement's sudden death, he smiled and said, "Han Xingxian can kill celestial phenomenon with 1 finger. It's not unusual for a 2nd class to kill a 1st class." He saw that Su Fengnian was expressionless and didn't seem to be interested in talking to him, so he was happy to talk to himself. "But that's not surprising, but it's very surprising that you're proficient in the art of skinning human cats. I just don't know if you know the last 2 realms of scraping bones and pulling out tendons." He turned his wrist and Bai Qiao, who was pulled along by the long rope, spun around as he looked down at the Prince of Beiliang who had come alone. Zhao Go had a confidential file specially collected for His Royal Highness, which was only slightly thinner than Chao Changqing's in the Heavenly Archive Room. He had casually flipped through it earlier, and it had truly broadened his horizons. Han Diaoxi, who was said to have died of an illness in the Imperial Palace, had actually been killed by the young man in front of him with a flying sword outside godly martial city. Logically speaking, Su Fengnian's realm had plummeted after Master Lu Hao's beating, so it wasn't too difficult for him to kill a movement at the Vajra realm, but it also wasn't easy. The crux of the matter was how this Su fellow had obtained the unusual finger mystic realm of human cats. He didn't believe that there was anyone else in the world who had been lucky enough to comprehend the finger mystic realm's looking glass technique, which was known as pointing straight to the heart of heaven. Not only did it have a photographic memory, it could also extract the essence. The reason why the female sword attendant in the Wu family sword mound, the one who carried the Su of Gojoseon on her back, could steal sword techniques and sword intent, no matter how obscure they were, was more of an instinct that only happened once in 100 years. However, she was limited to stealing other people's sword techniques, and was still a little inferior to Jiang Ding's ability to accept everything. If this Su fellow had the same aptitude as Jiang Ding, then Jiang Ding really wouldn't be able to eat or sleep in peace. Since ancient times, one mountain couldn't accommodate 2 tigers, even if this mountain was the entire Jianghu. The Jianghu was indeed very big, but Jiang Ding was very narrow-minded and couldn't tolerate any potential opponent who had the chance to stand side by side with him. Earlier, Jiang Ding had seen Su fellow kill Yu Zhang very clearly. First, it was Dong Tai's flying sword pinning technique, then it was Han Diaoxi's skinning technique. Both of them were top killing techniques in the world. Yu Zhang's attacks were completely disorganized and he tried to kill Jiang Ding with a single blow using his Vajra realm physique. How could there be such a good thing in the world? However, Jiang Ding didn't find this strange. Yu Zhang had just entered the first-rank state and was immediately scared out of his wits by Han Diaoxi. Since then he had been as timid as a mouse and had never fought with a master of the same level. Therefore, it was definitely not good to be reckless in the Jianghu, but it was also not good to be overly concerned with one's cultivation and thus cherish one's life too much. Jiang Ding raised his wrist and twirled the red string of his saber with 2 fingers. The crossing the river was still spinning as he bent down to look at Su Fengnian. There's an extremely powerful master at the top of the mountain. I definitely can't beat him, and even if I wanted to escape, I might not be able to escape alive. However, you and I are about the same age and background. You Su Fengyin can be considered a noble family, but I'm not bad either. Those dukes and marquises of Zhulu Mountain are also people who occupy mountains and call themselves kings. However, in terms of seniority, they still have to call me martial granduncle or something. Therefore, in the so-called Jianghu of Yuzhang and the others, there's no one with a better background than me. How about it? Do you dare to fight me to the death? Don't worry, even if I can kill you, I won't. I still want to live well and go to Beiliang's frontier fortress to experience Beimang's desert scenery. Su Fengyin, Beiliang is your territory. It's up to you whether you want to fight or not. If you dare, I'll accompany you to the end. If you lose, I'll give you this crossing the river pawn in my hand. If you don't dare and want to be a coward, I'll immediately turn around and run. Su Fengyin laughed. I dare, but no matter how powerful you are, you're only at the level of the fifth raccoon. Compared to a human cat, you're a long way off. However, whether you dare or not is one thing, whether you want to or not is another. You should run. I'll give you the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn. After that, Lingzhou's Deputy General Han Laoshan will lead the troops to suppress the bandits. Oh, let me tell you, you've been appointed by the Imperial Court to weave official documents and court bulletins. I estimate that very soon, you'll reach the prince's mansion and the administrator's residence at the same time. However, I'll pretend I didn't see you. I'll say this first. While you're on the run, I won't count if you hurt anyone, but if you kill any soldier, I'll make you lose an arm. If you can make any cavalry throw away their armor, I'll remember your kindness. Jiang Fuding didn't panic even though his amulet was so easily torn away. He straightened up on his horse and smiled. I heard you went with Li Chenggang to Guangling River. How come I didn't see you learn the old god of swordsmanship? You're quite despicable. Su Fengyin reached out and grabbed the human skin of the movement. He was prepared to hang it on the easternmost city of Lingzhou along with the bones. He wanted to tell the restless foreign Jianghu people what kind of price they had to pay if they wanted to stir up trouble in Beiliang. Outside Shenwu City, Su Fengyin had not only collected some humans, cats, and a few remaining red snakes, but he had also collected some secrets from the skull. Among them was the Vajra movement of Mount Zhulu, who was in charge of waiting for rabbits to find out. Su Fengyin expressionlessly raised the human skin. Jiang Fuding suddenly shook his wrist and tightly gripped this pawn that had never appeared in the Jianghu. After Jiang Fuding made this murderous move, Su Yanbing also raised his spear at the top of the mountain. Finally, Jiang Fuding laughed loudly, his thick killing intent dissipating. Su Fengyin, don't force yourself. Since you've been beaten up badly by the movement, spit out blood if you want to. Don't suffer because you want to save face. Su Fengyin smiled. There's only half an incense stick left. Jiang Fuding smiled. That's not right. There should be half an incense stick left. Su Fengyin said calmly, my incense stick is different from yours. Jiang Fuding sighed and loosened the red rope. The famous blade in its white scabbard hung from it. He stared deeply at this guy, then silently turned his horse around. He was confident that he could win against Su Yanbing, but even if he killed him, he would die at the hands of the master on the mountaintop. It was not worth it. His life was much more valuable than that of the crown prince of Beiliang. A voice suddenly came from behind him. Leave the blade. You don't deserve it anyway. With his back to Su Fengyin, the young man in the black robe looked gloomy, as if he was hesitating whether or not to use the blade. In the end, Jiang Fuding did not turn around. With a shake of his wrist, he broke the red rope, grabbed the pawn and threw it to the back of his head. Su Fengyin's pupils contracted, and his body did not move an inch. The spear on the mountaintop streaked across the sky, hitting the seemingly slow and leisurely falling blade. There was lightning in the square inch. A huge ravine was blasted open on the road. The momentum of the blade, which contained evil intentions, was shattered by the spear, and it happened to fall on top of Su Fengyin's head. Su Fengyin reached out to take the white scabbard blade and wrapped the human skin in the scabbard. After the dust settled, the horse was still there, but that person was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 960. Once Jiang Fuding left, the peregrine falcons in the sky and the scouts on the ground also moved. Huang Xiaokuai led the Pearl Cavalry in pursuit to the east. Among them was Han Laoshan, who oversaw. The military orders were quickly passed to the northern commandant Ren Chunyun and the Fengqiu commandant Zhu Boyu. Su Fengyin gave Yu Zhang's skin and bones to a few retainers to be sent to the easternmost part of Beiliang's road, Fengxi City. When he slowly reached the top of the mountain, the frozen field commandant Ma Jinshai brushed past the Pearl Cavalry. He brought a few personal guards and retainers with him to the top of the mountain. By the time he reached the top of the mountain he was already panting. Seeing His Royal Highness, who had a blade at his waist and a blade in his hand, about to enter the carriage, he quickly dismounted and knelt to beg for forgiveness. Based on Ma Jinshai's past personality, if His Royal Highness had not killed one person and driven the other away, and if the master and servant had not tried to kill him, he would have been too lazy to go up and be scolded. He would have just left the mess to his family's elders to deal with. His Ma family, from his grandfather's generation to his father's generation, all had military achievements. They were all old generals who had contributed greatly to the Su family. Ma Jinshai did not believe that His Highness would remove him from his commandant position to the end. Even if His Highness was so unreasonable with Ma Jinshai's in-laws with Beiliang's military chief, Yan Wenwan, was there a need to be afraid that he would not be able to make a comeback? However, Ma Jinshai knew that in this encirclement, his frozen field cavalry was at a disadvantage. In the beginning he wanted to go for wool and come home shorn. Instead, he showed his bare buttocks to His Highness and the two Lingzhou deputy generals. He wanted to come to the top of the mountain to be scolded by His Highness and vent his anger on the spot. His position as a commandant would be kept. Ma Jinshai, who was a descendant of a general, was careless in his management of the army, but he still knew a bit about the rules of the officialdom. Su Fengyan had just raised his foot to sit in the carriage when he heard the frozen field commandant sobbing behind him. He turned around and walked toward Ma Jinshai. Ma Jinshai heard the footsteps and quickly raised his head to take a look. He saw that His Highness's expression was calm. He had heard many rumors about His Highness, so he was not sure about His Highness's temperament. Fortunately, he did not directly reveal his anger. This made Ma Jinshai feel a bit more at ease. He thought that their Ma family indeed had some reputation. Even His Highness had to be careful and not vent his anger on Ma Jinshai. Just as Ma Jinshai thought that he had escaped a disaster, Su Fengyan stepped on Ma Jinshai's fat head. Half of his head smashed into the ground, and he fainted on the spot. The three retainers followed the commandant and knelt on the ground. They were dumbstruck from fright. They immediately lowered their gazes and stared at the ground. Their hearts rose and fell. Then they quickly heard the ruthless His Royal Highness say coldly, "Carry this piece of trash away. When he wakes up, tell him that the frozen field cavalry has been disbanded. Including the three of you, 600 people will be recorded and will never be employed in the Beiliang army again. If you want to join the army again, you have to use your father's military achievements to offset it. If you don't want to, then be a good-for-nothing son of Lingzhou for the rest of your life. If you commit a crime in the future, you will all be heavily punished. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Right now Ma Jinshai is just like you." Wei Shaking and Xanin Ma, who had stayed at the top of the mountain, quietly looked at each other. They both realized that the other party could not laugh. Previously, all of the generals in Lingzhou, big and small, were laughing at the civil officials of Lingzhou, including Li Gongda. Now the tables had turned. It seemed like the civil officials had a chance to gloat over the general's misfortune. Fortunately, the two commandants of Tongmen Pass had always been aloof from the Lingzhou officialdom. They had always been considered by Beiliang as his trusted aides. Otherwise, the two of them would probably have a good time eating a pot of hard liquor. The generals of the same province did not have good days. Wei Shaking and Xanin Ma, who held elite troops, could not help but feel a bit of sympathy. Su Fengyan stepped on Ma Jinshai and knocked her out. He then turned to Wei Shaking and Xanin Ma and cupped his fists with a smile. "I'll have to trouble the two of you to guard Tongmen Pass. In the future, when Beiliang restructures, you might have to call Commandant Wei and Commandant Xin in terms of official titles. However, the ranks will not change. Furthermore, Tongmen Pass is an important location, so the salaries of the generals will also be increased. If you need superior war horses and military equipment, you can directly ask me." The two commandants immediately knelt down to thank him. Not lowering their ranks meant that they would not touch Tongmen Pass. Furthermore, His Highness' verbal promise was real. In the past, if the Lingzhou military officials wanted to fight over war horses and weapons with Yiliangzu on the border, they could not even think about it. Those were all things that were left over from other people's mouths. For example, Wei Shaking and Xanin Ma would occasionally meet up and drink with their colleagues who had returned home after taking leave. Even if they faced those commandants of lower ranks, they still felt inferior. Looking at the situation, His Royal Highness had recently promoted the new Lingzhou provincial governor and His Highness. It was clear that he was telling Beiliang that he did not like Lingzhou's officialdom. However, it seemed that he would only place more importance on Lingzhou's military town. This made Wei Shaking and Xanin Ma, who hoped to continue climbing the ranks, extremely happy. Su Fengnian purposely left things blank, allowing the two commandants to chew on the aftertaste. Sitting in the carriage, it was still Su Yanbing who acted as the coachman to chase after that Jiang Fuding. It was enough to have Han Laoshan, who was at the finger-profound realm, as a stabilizing force. It was not like he was a human cat. An expert at the level of Han Xingxian was roaming around Beiliang. There was no need for him to use Su Yanbing, who had a chance of winning against Hong Jingyan, as a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. He needed to rush north to the border and then meet up with Su Xiao. Pei Nanwei saw that Su Fengnian had an additional white scabbard long saber in his hand and was a little curious. Back then when she was outside she did not see the scene on the road in detail. Through the rough conversation between the two Lingzhou deputy generals and the two commandants, she knew that after he went down the mountain, he killed that seemingly unstoppable first-rank Vajra realm expert. Regarding this, Pei Nanwei was not that surprised. Back then this young man brought 200 cavalry and confronted the old king of Jing and Zhao Heng's 1,000 cavalry. He even dared to raise his spear and kill people in front of the formation. Pei Nanwei shifted her position and sat in a corner. She placed the saber on her knees, and blood seeped out of her 7 orifices. It seemed like it was not easy for him to kill people just now. He waited until there was no one around before revealing his weakness. Pei Nanwei smiled. Was she actually laughing at herself for not being human? However, Su Fengnian mistook it as mocking him. He glanced at her coldly. Pei Nanwei did not mind and asked, "Why don't you go and beat the dog that is down?" Chapter 961. Su Fengnian had only pulled out the river crossing pond by 2 inches, but the interior of the carriage was already filled with a sense of honor. Even Pei Nanwei could not help but take a few more glances. When Su Fengnian unsheathed the river crossing pond, Pei Nanwei felt a chill seeping into her skin. She could not help but wrap her arms around her chest to resist the chill. Probably because he noticed his sorry state from the blade that was as clear as a mirror, Su Fengnian used his sleeve to wipe the blood off his face and tapped the middle of the blade with a finger. Unexpectedly, the river crossing pond did not tilt up like other heavy weapons. Instead, the blade rippled, quietly eliminating the vibrations caused by Su Fengnian's finger tapping. In the eyes of outsiders, the river crossing pond looked like an extremely arrogant and beautiful woman, unmoved by all the flattery of men. When Su Fengnian mentioned the river crossing pond, it was almost in front of his eyes. Only then did he realize that the blade was engraved with complicated and obscure talisman cloud patterns, like the rolling clouds, full of vitality. The eye-opening Su Fengnian could not help but sigh, "This blade is alive." Pei Nanwei was really sarcastic this time. She laughed and asked, "Is there still an object in this world that can move His Royal Highness?" Su Fengnian did not turn his head. He stared at the enchanting scenery floating on the blade and calmly said, "Aren't there 2 in the carriage?" The river crossing pond was one, and the other was naturally her, Pei Nanwei. Pei Nanwei sneered, "This little girl is really honored." Su Fengnian put the blade back into its sheath and laughed, "You're a little girl? You're a woman in your early 30s. If you got married and had children in the countryside, you might have become a grandmother by now." These words, when placed in the Jianghu where men and women fought against each other, were no different from the killing power of a sword immortal. As expected, Pei Nanwei was so angry that her chest trembled slightly. She pressed one hand on her chest and the other hand on her thigh, trying to calm her emotions. She smiled sweetly, "Look at how much blood you've lost. If I weigh it, it must be several kilograms, right? Does it hurt?" Su Fengnian, who was leaning against the carriage, did not say anything. He stretched out 2 fingers and pinched her thigh. Pei Nanwei's eyebrows knitted together, but she did not make a sound. Su Fengnian loosened his fingers. Pei Nanwei heaved a sigh of relief. She did not expect Su Fengnian to repeat his old trick. Pei Nanwei sucked in a breath of cold air. Her dignified and gentle face, which made this Princess Jing, and become one of the most beautiful women in the world, looked very painful. Su Fengnian seemed to be addicted. He repeated it several times until Pei Nanwei, who did not say anything to stop him, became numb. Her hatred for him could not be any greater. To this young man who she wanted to cut into pieces, she, Pei Nanwei, was indeed the same as the famous white sheath saber that was snatched from other people's hands. They were both objects that were snatched because they were moved. When they were bored they would play with it. When they were not free they would put it back into the sheath and not even look at it, leaving it to be covered in dust. Su Fengnian finally stopped deliberately letting Pei Nanwei suffer this kind of physical pain. Needless to say, her slender thigh was already bruised and swollen. Su Fengnian switched to his palm and placed it on her thigh. Pei Nanwei's pain was like a spring breeze that melted the snow. However, this made Pei Nanwei feel even more humiliated as a plaything. She bit her lips until her thin lips were bleeding. Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, "The first time will be very painful. Later on it will be nothing more than that. You asked me if it hurts when I bleed from my 7 orifices. In fact, it's the same reason as you. When I say these things you most likely won't listen, so I can only let you feel it. How about it, now that you know that it doesn't hurt, you already feel that it is a kind of happiness. That's why we are all cheap goods. We don't know the good fortune of standing and talking. I once heard a joke, saying that the poor commoners wondered whether the old emperor would eat scallion pancakes for every meal. They thought it was funny. When I first traveled to Jianghu, I only realized that being able to fill my stomach when I ate those cornbread and roasted sweet potatoes. I was so happy that I didn't even think about those delicacies. A person's happiness and suffering are different depending on where they live, but the depth is roughly the same. That's why no one should look down on anyone, no one should laugh at anyone. Anything can be fought for, but the place of reincarnation is something that no matter how hard you work, you can't fight for in this lifetime. When encountering injustice, being able to accept one's fate is a skill, and being able to put your life on the line is even more amazing. However, those who are unwilling to accept their fate and are willing to put their life on the line are also not good, because they often do things without a bottom line and like to harm others. Yuan Tingshan, who rose to the top in Jizhou, is one such example. I've seen all kinds of people at the bottom of the Jianghu, and I've seen all kinds of people at the top of Mount Qingliang. I've never liked to associate with those who don't have a bottom line. Pei Nanwei sneered, "If you weren't the hereditary heir of Beiliang, who would be willing to exchange pleasantries with you? Don't even talk about flattery. It's only because you reincarnated well that you have the qualifications to say these things." For the first time, Su Fengnian didn't refute and grunted in agreement. However, not only did Pei Nanwei not have the feeling of returning victorious, she actually felt somewhat dull. The heir of the king of Jing and Zhao Sun was undoubtedly one of those who reincarnated well, but so what? Su Fengnian suddenly asked, "I'm going to take a trip to the desolate border that borders Beimang. Do you want to see the desert scenery? I've been to Beimang before and I've seen the clouds fall with my own eyes. It's like the sky and the earth are aligned. It's really not bad." Seeing this, one's state of mind can also be a bit more open. In the northernmost part of Yuzhou, there's also a mountain called Rooster Crow. When day and night alternate, the sand sounds like a rooster crowing in the morning. Pei Nanwei didn't directly answer but asked in passing, "You're going to the border to participate in the military parade? What, has the great general already begun to prepare for you to be the hereditary heir of the king of Beiliang? He's afraid that you won't be able to convince the masses, so he's going to personally hold the line for you in the Beiliang border army?" As soon as these words came out, Pei Nanwei was as silent as a cicada in winter. She wasn't afraid of the young man beside her, who she had the confidence to be on equal footing with, but from the bottom of her heart, she was afraid of the old man with a hunched back and a smile whenever she bumped into him in Beiliang Palace. That old man was old, but Pei Nanwei still couldn't imagine when and where the old man would die. If the old man finally died, would the fallen 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn be able to close their eyes in peace? Su Fengnian silently left the carriage, requested a warhorse from Tongmen Pass and rode it alone. Would a Beiliang without Su Shao still be a Beiliang? At this time, a simple carriage quietly entered the desolate border of Beimang, which had been trampled by the Beiliang cavalry. The coachman was the second most powerful person in the world, Tuoba Bodhisattva. Chapter 962. Winter passed and spring came. Orioles sang among hundreds of birds. Flocks of small orioles could often be seen shuttling among the green grasses on both sides of the post-house road in Yuzhou. Unfortunately, Beiliang had a rough folk culture, and there were no scholars who would go to listen to orioles singing yellow opera in spring. A carriage was moving slowly northward. A woman in the carriage was holding an oriole's nest that she picked from a low branch. Occasionally, she would lift the curtain to take a look at the scenery along the way. Along the way, in order to save time, she seldom stopped in the city. She was in the middle of nowhere, and the most embarrassing thing for a woman was that she had 3 urgent needs. The first time she wanted to go to the toilet, she clenched her legs and gritted her teeth to hold on for half an hour. However, the man, who had long sensed that something was wrong, didn't say anything. When she finally couldn't hold it anymore and asked to get off the carriage, she lowered her head and sat back in the carriage. She even heard a bad joke from the man. He said that there was once an official who dressed incognito to observe the public's opinion, but his stomach felt uncomfortable in the wilderness. Every time he wanted to go to the toilet, he asked the coachman to find a quiet place for him to take off his pants. The coachman found several places for the official, but every time the official untied his belt and squatted down, he didn't want to go there anymore. Later, whenever the official asked if he had found a place, the coachman said no. Finally, the official couldn't stand it anymore, so he jumped off the carriage and took off his pants while running. In the end, he even added fuel to the fire by asking her if she had found a place with good feng shui. On the way back, she had conveniently picked up a bird's nest made of pine needles and grass. After hearing his words, she threw it at him fiercely. The man gently caught the bird's nest with one hand and handed it back to her with a smile. He made up for his mistake by telling her an embarrassing story. He said that when he was traveling, he accidentally went to the toilet and heard a lot of noise next door. He was bored to death, so he opened his mouth to tease his brother a few times. In the end, his toilet door was torn down by a female hero with a cold face with a sword. He was so scared that he almost fell into the toilet pit. He quickly covered his crotch with his hands. In the end, the female hero coldly threatened to cut off his 3 legs. This mother***er really is a loose tongue. If he hadn't been quick-witted and suddenly let go of his hand, letting that heroine have a good look at what it means to have a great display of masculinity, scaring her away, he probably wouldn't have been able to avoid a good beating. Pei Nanwei didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she saw him say these shameful words. She didn't argue with him anymore. Even the heir apparent of Bailiang was so embarrassed. She, a woman who was no longer the princess consort of a vassal state, was too lazy to pretend to be a heroine. On this trip north to the border, peregrine falcons had been constantly passing on secret reports. Naturally, Su Fengnian did not tell her the important military information, but he did tell her all the harmless secrets. For example, the Qingqing Prince Wu Lingsu of the Qingyang Palace had entered the capital to be conferred a title. He had been given half a cup of the Taoist Master's Mansion's Minister of Feathered Dress and was able to rule across the river. He had great power and was in charge of the North and South Taoist schools together. The high and mighty Longhu Mountain seemed to be unable to bear such grievances and quickly took out their trump card. It was said that their leader Zhao Danxia had cultivated the most difficult Jade Emperor Tower in Taoism and ascended together with the old Taoist master Zhao Shi. Then the imperial court immediately allowed Prime Minister Qingci Zhao Danping in the capital to be the leader of the southern Taoist sect. They also made an exception and granted the young Taoist master of the Taoist master's residence, Zhao Ningxian, to be an official in the imperial court. He became the emperor's personal attendant who was even more envied than Huangmen. There was another thing that had nothing to do with the imperial court. It was purely a matter of Jianghu people. The nameless old swordsman who was addicted to eating swords finally made a move. However, it wasn't Wang Xianji of the martial emperor city who did it himself. Instead, he let his 4 direct disciples block the sword one by one. The first 3 disciples who were recognized as geniuses were unable to block the sword. In the end, the eldest disciple, Yu Groom, who had always been hidden by his junior brother, blocked the sword with his saber. This shocked Jianghu. This sabersman was immediately regarded as a top master who could make General Gu Jiantang fight with all his strength. Pei Nanwei didn't have the slightest interest in these secrets that made the blood of all Jianghu people boil. They went in one ear and out the other. She just took it as a joke to relieve her boredom. When they were close to the frontier fortress, the carriage stopped for a while in Qingshan County. Su Fengnian specially took Pei Nanwei to a restaurant to eat a local dish called green essence rice, which was made by crushing the leaves of nanju, soaking the rice in its juice and steaming it. It was green in color and had a tempting aroma. However, the large blue and white porcelain bowl used to hold the rice was almost a foot wide, which made Pei Nanwei stunned. She went all out and ate less than half of the bowl before she couldn't swallow it. Su Fengnian finished his own bowl like a whirlwind in clouds and took Pei Nanwei's bowl without hesitation. He still enjoyed the meal with relish. Su Yambing didn't enter the restaurant earlier. When he showed up later, he was accompanied by a middle-aged man in satin casual clothes. Su Fengnian, who was still eating with his head lowered, waved his hand and motioned for the strange-looking man to sit down. After the man sat down, he said softly, "Greetings to His Royal Highness." Su Fengnian put down his empty bowl and chopsticks and leaned lazily against the back of the crudely made and slightly rugged chair. He joked with a smile, "Huang Fuqing, what are you calling me? I've already changed from Commandant Gui to General Yuzhou, who is in charge of the military power of a province. Are you still used to it?" Huang Fuqing, who was already the new general of Yuzhou, didn't have the fear and modesty of an ordinary general. He only said in a deep voice, "I dare not disappoint your highness even if I have to die 10,000 times." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Qin Shiliang is in charge of the salt policy. If he doesn't ask you for help, You don't have to think too highly of yourself and let those unrestrained local tyrants do whatever they want. When Qin Shiliang asks you to borrow soldiers to kill someone, you can take action. At that time, don't be soft-hearted. Huang Fucheng's speed of promotion in the northern Liang path was second only to the provincial governor of Lingzhou, Su Beiji. He was fully deserving of being His Highness' trusted aide. However, the price he had to pay was so great that it made one's heart turn cold. He had to watch his entire clan die out. Huang Fucheng, who was so obsessed with being an official that he went crazy, naturally had a good reputation in the officialdom of Yuzhou. However, Huang Fucheng was fighting with his back to the wall in Beiliang. No one was willing to sit at the same table with such a treacherous villain even if he wanted to form a clique. This kind of puppet was most suitable to be used as a borrowed knife to kill people. It could be said that whoever used him would feel relieved. However, in Beiliang, only Su Fengnian was qualified to hold a knife. The more you talk, the more mistakes you make. In addition, Huang Fucheng had always believed in using meritorious deeds to exchange for official positions. Even if he had a meteoric rise, he still gave people the illusion that he was unhappy. Su Fengnian didn't care whether this general of Yuzhou had eaten or not. He still ordered a bowl of green rice for him and said with a smile, "You've integrated the Jianghu forces in Yuzhou well. My sister has a good opinion of you. I'll allow you to generously extend your hands and feet to Liangzhou in the future. By the way, you'll pay for the meal. I'll take it that you've done your duty as a host." Huang Fucheng stood up and respectfully saw His Royal Highness off. After sitting down, he wolfed down the rice. In the end, he took out all the gold and silver in the restaurant's waiter's eyes, which looked at him like he was an idiot. He placed them on the table and swaggered away. His duty as a host. He had bought the military power of the entire Yuzhou with the gold and silver he carried with him. Was it expensive or cheap? The carriage drove out of Qingshan County City. Su Fengnian lay comfortably in the carriage, crossing his legs and burping. Pei Nanwei sneered and said, "Isn't this notorious Huang Fucheng the person you said has no bottom line? Aren't you also comfortable using him?" Su Fengnian laughed and said, "How do you know he has no bottom line? Huang Fucheng and even Chu Lushan are actually not as simple as the outside world thinks. Naturally, they have nothing to do with good people. But when it comes to whether they have a bottom line or not, in my opinion, they have a much higher bottom line than those talkative and famous scholars who keep saying that they are worried about the country and the people while having sex with prostitutes. Those who regard themselves too much as human beings will easily not regard others as human beings. Those who do not regard themselves as human beings will, on the contrary, leave a little bit of a pure heart." To make an inappropriate comparison, Mount Wudong and Mount Longhu are both Taoist ancestral courts. The Taoist master's mansion's yellow-purple noble lady is full of immortal aura, so high and unapproachable that only high-ranking officials and dignitaries can walk through that door. The old Taoist with the highest seniority on Mount Wudong does not have any immortal aura, but he can chat with the common people and pilgrims about their daily lives. Who do you think is more humane? Huang Fucheng is my lackey. Whether it's me, His Royal Highness, or Huang Fucheng himself, we won't deny it. But if Huang Fucheng really wants this Yuzhou general to pour out his grievances, you won't have the heart to listen. Pei Nanwei flatly said, "I don't want to hear it either." Su Fengnian sighed and said, "Every family has its own difficulties. Only Qing Feng, who flips through books for no reason, knows about it." Pei Nanwei was stunned. She laughed and said, "I didn't know that you would also be sad about the passing of spring." Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said, "I'm a talented scholar who can write hundreds of poems in a year, okay?" Pei Nanwei squinted and said, "Buying poems and copying poems counts?" Su Fengnian laughed and said, "If I didn't spend a lot of money to buy these poems of Beiliang's poor scholars, do you think they would have enough money to travel thousands of miles to the capital to take the imperial examination?" Pei Nanwei asked in return, "Has anyone ever said good things about you and remembered your kindness?" Su Fengnian's mouth twitched. There was a rare awkwardness on his face. "It's probably because I didn't hear it." Pei Nanwei sneered and said, "Moreover, Beiliang is barren and the number of scholars is even fewer. In the end, you gave them all to the imperial court with both hands. You, His Royal Highness, are really magnanimous." Su Fengnian rubbed his stomach, which could fill 2 big blue and white bowls of rice, and said self-mockingly, "My magnanimity is not small. But good people have good karma. Didn't nearly 1,000 foreign scholars come to Beiliang to take root?" Chapter 963. To the north of Qingan County in Yuzhou was Yanji County. The reason why it was called Yanji County was that Yanji County's wives were famous for their beauty. Even in the Central Plains, some rich old men in Jiangnan circuit would take pride in marrying a young woman from Yanji County as a concubine. Most of the beautiful women from Yanji County who were unwilling to suffer hardships preferred to leave the border for the rich and fertile Central Plains, never to return. Even though many of them had fallen into prostitution, they would never turn back. Thus, they were mocked by the Liang imperial court as flowers in the wall, fragrance outside the wall. There was another Yanji County with the same name in Yanji County, which was full of beautiful women. It was a man's good fortune to marry a Yanji County woman and bring her home to warm his bed. If an official in Yuzhou didn't have a Yanji County woman as a concubine or a concubine, he wouldn't have the face to go out and greet his colleagues. Pei Nanwei might have been tired of wearing that cumbersome curtain hat. When she entered the inn in Yanji County to spend the night, she abandoned the curtain hat and was shocked by the men and women who were lucky enough to recognize her face. Today was the Lantern Festival of the first year of Xianghu. The Lantern Festival was a big festival. Officials and people enjoyed it together and went out to enjoy the lanterns together. Yuzhou was obviously very different from Lingzhou, which had a granary. Although the lantern market was lively, it didn't have a glorious aura. Men and women's clothes were also mostly simple, unlike Lingzhou, which liked to be luxurious. Yuzhou was neither Liangzhou where the Su family lived nor Lingzhou, which was relatively stable and comfortable. Yuzhou had always been mocked by the officials of Yuzhou as being raised by a stepmother. Of course, they didn't forget to bring 1 or 2 Yanji County women who were bought with a lot of money. As a stepping stone for the unfamiliar official career, it was tacky to give money. If they gave too little, they would be looked down on. Giving women was both elegant and practical. Su Fengyin and Pei Nanwei walked side by side. They looked like a perfect couple. In the night, they could only see Pei Nanwei's face from afar. Therefore they didn't cause too much of a stir. However, those who had seen her face and figure didn't want to go too far away. If she wasn't in their bowl, they could take a few more glances at her bowl to satisfy their craving. Some idle ruffians were quite bold. They wanted to take advantage of the crowd to take advantage of her. However, they were kicked far away by Su Fengyin. They were just shrimps who looked fierce but were timid at heart. They were angry but didn't dare to say anything. Furthermore, they were in the wrong first. After that, they became much more restrained. Originally, they wanted to pretend to call for people to gang up on the child. However, no one was willing to take a few more glances at the beautiful woman on the mural. Therefore they gave up bitterly. In addition, in Yuzhou, the government would turn a blind eye to fights. However, if they made trouble in the lantern market, they would definitely be caught and skinned by the patrolling soldiers. There were 3 scholars walking in front of Su Fengyin and Pei Nanwei. Judging from their accents, they were scholars from the Central Plains. Most likely, they had heard that Yanji County was full of beauties and could be easily found on the streets. Therefore they came here to try their luck. Bailiang women were bold and unrestrained, so they might have a short-lived marriage. The 3 young scholars had already seen the beautiful young woman behind them. Due to etiquette and self-esteem, they didn't have the nerve to strike up a conversation with her. Therefore they could only slow down their steps and deliberately speak in a loud voice. It was as if they were competing to see who could speak more shockingly. Some said that they were relatives of a certain official in Lingzhou and would soon enter the county government office to become an official. Some said that it had always been the Liang dynasty who had been watching Bailiang with ulterior motives. Now that West Chu was about to be reinstated, Bailiang could finally sit down and eat melon seeds while watching the imperial court make a fool of itself. There were also some who said that since childhood, they had yearned for the iron horses and golden spears of the frontier fortress. Which scholar had given up the scholarly honor that was within reach and had come to this impoverished land to enlist in the army? When Su Fengyin heard one of the scholars mention the endlessly prattling West Chu's victory and defeat, he smiled and quickened his pace. He took the initiative to ask, "Young master, how do you know that the rain station of West Chu is destined to end miserably within half a year?" The scholar, who did indeed have a somewhat refined temperament, did not reply to Su Fengyin. Instead, he shot a glance at Pei Nanwei and introduced himself. "This young one is a descendant of the Fan family in Huansha County, Gangnam-do." Su Fengyin went with the flow and feigned surprise. The Fan family in Huansha County is the most famous county in the south of the old northern Han. I never imagined that young Master Fan's background would be so illustrious. There are only a few families like this in all of Bailiang. It is certain that even the prefects of Bailiang would treat you as an honored guest. It is an honor to meet young Master Fan. The other scholar also hurriedly introduced himself. He was from the Shizhao Zhou family in Dongyue. The remaining scholar, probably because he was of ordinary birth, was speechless and indignant. In reality, the Fan family in Huansha County and the Shizhao Zhou family were flourishing during the spring and autumn period. They were not first-rate families that were unreachable. As long as one had the surname of Fan and Zhou, most of them would be relatives. No one would take them seriously. These two scholars had clearly come to Beiliang, where their horizons were not broad, in order to make up the numbers. In this era where even the servants of wealthy families had sharp eyes and could see the depth of a family's wealth with just a belt, such clumsy tricks were not worth mentioning. They had clearly underestimated the abilities of Beiliang's officials. Beiliang was poor, but the poor were the common people who faced the earth and the sky. The officials were not poor at all. Su Fengnian had originally wanted to fish for information and amuse himself. Unexpectedly, Pei Nanwei's words were truly earth-shattering. What does your surnames and names have to do with this old lady? This old lady only likes robust men over 200 jin. The three of you can scram to the side and cool off. It was as if the three scholars had been struck by lightning. Afterwards, they didn't even dare to let out a fart, leaving with their tails between their legs. Su Fengnian gave Pei Nanwei a thumbs up. She ran her fingers through her hair and turned her head. When she turned her head, the corners of her mouth curled up. She had a rare expression on her face that said, "If this old lady doesn't make a move, she will be invincible." Su Fengnian touched the pot that didn't boil. He clicked his tongue and praised, "Beiliang is really a place with good feng shui. Sister Pei has also been infected with heroic spirit." Pei Nanwei scowled coldly. She kicked the back of Su Fengnian's shoe and twisted it hard. Su Fengnian was amenable to coaxing but not coercion, let alone pain. He muttered to himself, "It's only been half a year? Chao Changqing and Sun Shiji, two great remnants of West Chu, working together shouldn't be so useless, right?" Pei Nanwei said coldly, "A lot of people will die." Su Fengnian's eyes were ice cold. He said slowly, "Yes, a lot of people will die. But you also have to know that there are so many people in West Chu who have shaved their hair and fled to Zen. They don't hesitate to shut themselves in cellars and escape into the mountains to become wild elders. They've lost their minds and are patrolling the city in the middle of the night, shouting that everyone is a ghost. They're all living a life worse than death. This group of wandering ghosts who can't forget the West Chu dynasty can't wait to drag their families down with them. You don't even know how to evaluate such foolishly loyal remnants." Pei Nanwei said hatefully, "If they want to die a worthy death, no one can stop them. But don't implicate the innocent people who just want to live a peaceful life and have a good night's sleep." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "In the past, I always felt that you were lifeless, like a female ghost in human skin who haunts ancient temples deep in the mountains. Only today do I know that you can still speak human language. Why don't you stay in Yanji County? Maybe you'll become a living person in the future. When you miss the reeds by Tidehark Lake, you can go back and take a look." Pei Nanwei said without hesitation, "Okay." Su Fengnian was momentarily absent-minded. He seemed to have said these words to others before. However, Su Fengnian quickly recovered and nodded with a smile. "Then I'll have to show off my status as the heir. I'll ask the governor of Yanji County to arrange a private residence for you where no one will disturb you." Su Fengnian asked for directions and arrived at the governor's mansion. Unfortunately, the governor had also brought a large group of family members to enjoy themselves with the common people. The gatekeeper, who had trained a pair of discerning eyes, saw that Su Fengnian had an extraordinary aura and had him sit in a small room by the side door. After waiting for 4 whole hours, even the gatekeeper was somewhat impressed by the young man's patience. During this time, the gatekeeper solicitously inquired about his well-being and served him tea. Naturally, this was because Su Fengnian had taken advantage of the beauty Pei Nanwei's reputation. Governor Hong Shandong rubbed his eyes as he returned in high spirits. He had never set foot in Beiliang Palace in his life and didn't recognize the young master. However, he recognized the retainer, who could only stand. It was the general's personal bodyguard, Su Yanbing. One year, when the general was patrolling the border, he passed by Yanji County. Hong Shandong was fortunate enough to meet him once. This person was actually qualified to eat and drink with the general. His memory was especially vivid. If Su Yanbing had to stand, then who was the young man sitting and drinking tea? Hong Shandong wasn't an idiot. He immediately collected his thoughts and waved his sleeves. With a plop, he knelt on the ground and paid his respects to His Royal Highness who had come to his humble abode. The large group of Hong family descendants crowded outside the small room widened their eyes. The older ones knew the ways of the world and were somewhat fearful. The younger ones' clean eyes were filled with childlike curiosity. Although the threshold of the governor's mansion wasn't low, the highest position received by the governor was only the previous general of Yuzhou. How high was His Royal Highness's position? When this young man put on the yellow official robe and became the king of Beiliang, everyone in Liang would know how high his position was. Hong Shandong didn't have the courage to look at Pei Nanwei from beginning to end. After knowing that this woman with no clear status would live in Yanji County, he was surprised but not happy. He didn't mind enshrining her like a female bodhisattva. This was what he should do. It might not be a merit, but since ancient times, beauties were a source of trouble. If there was the slightest mistake, then wouldn't his originally smooth career come to an end? However, since His Highness the Crown Prince had spoken, Hong Shandong could only grit his teeth and squeeze out a smile to agree. That night, the governor tossed out an elegant residence with mountains and rivers. Su Fengyin had the men of sacrifice secretly greet the spies in Yanji County. The men of sacrifice were originally great spies who had accumulated great prestige. They were familiar with this kind of shady business and could handle it flawlessly. Afterwards, Su Fengyin abandoned the carriage, which was already redundant, and rode with Su Yambing out of the city that very night. They hurried to the familiar Tuma Pass. When Pei Nanwei got off the carriage, she didn't forget to pick up the curtain hat. In the secluded residence with only 2 old servant girls, she stood in the courtyard without saying a word. It was only when she was about to go to bed that she threw the curtain hat in the courtyard. On the dressing cabinet in the room, she caught a glimpse of several boxes of exquisite and expensive rouge. She sneered and said, "It's all a burden." How many of the seemingly valuable items were actually valuable? Chapter 964. The East Sea Martial Emperor City had always been rumored to have 3 oddities. The oddities were that there were always more foreigners than locals in the city. The oddities were that the inner city wall was filled with weapons. The oddities were, of course, the number 2 in the world who had lived for 100 years. To the people of Liang Jianghu, not having been to the Martial Emperor City meant that they had never been to the Jianghu. The first oddities were not strange. Every year, several second-grade master realm and even first-grade masters would try to climb the city wall, hoping to become famous. For example, the 9th Blades Huang Ascending Tower had attracted top masters like Chao Changqing to watch the battle. As a result, the Martial Emperor City had attracted a large number of heroes who came to seek adventure. The second oddities were even more reasonable. If one failed to climb the tower, he had to leave his weapon on the wall. Old Monster Wang had dominated the Martial Emperor City for 60 years. In the first 10 years he often had to accept 3 or 4 challenges a day. Over time, the wall was filled with heavenly weapons, including the contribution of the Dongyue sword pool suzerain, Song Yanqing. The third oddities were why Wang Xinji, who was the number 1 in the world, still claimed to be the number 2 in the world. No one knew the inside story. There were many weapon shops, pawn shops, and martial arts arenas in the Martial Emperor City. This was even easier to explain. What else could one do in the Martial Emperor City if not fight to become famous? Many of the heroes of today's world had fought their way to fame when they were young. However, the martial arts arenas in the city had been quiet recently. Indeed, the strange sword that entered the city a few days ago was too confusing. Last year, Beimeng had overstepped its authority and established a ranking of 10 people. Among the swordsmen, only the Peach Blossom sword god Dong Tai was listed. However, it was rumored that he had gone to the sea to visit the Immortals and there was no news of him. However, there was a sword that had been hovering outside the Martial Emperor City for a long time. When all the Jianghu people in the city had lost their patience, the sword finally moved. It was discovered by a child who threw stones at the sword. When the child hurriedly ran back home to tell his father, the father rolled his eyes and ignored him. He just treated it as if he had missed the fun. It was Wang Xinji's 4th disciple, Lu Huang. He was 46 years old and had the sword, Bodhisattva Barbarian. Lu Huang could be said to be an exceptional sword art prodigy. He took a crooked path of abandoning the Tao in pursuit of skills. It was like a person walking with a limp. However, Lu Huang only walked with 1 leg and was already far ahead in the Martial Emperor City. Wang Xinji once had the intention to let Lu Huang guard the pavilion when Song Yanqing ascended the pavilion for the 2nd time. It was a pity that Song Yanqing had died suddenly. However, Lu Huang's attainment in sword arts was imaginable. Wang Xinji once had the intention to let Lu Huang guard the pavilion when Song Yanqing ascended the pavilion for the 2nd time. It was a pity that Song Yanqing suddenly died. However, Lu Huang's attainment in sword arts was imaginable. Lu Huang sat cross-legged with his sword across his knees and waited for 2 hours. When the flying sword arrived at the city wall at the speed of a turtle, Lu Huang unsheathed his sword and used the tip of his sword to block the sword. However, the sword that entered the city was extremely weak. However, Lu Huang's Bodhisattva Barbarian didn't seem to be affected at all. Lu Huang then stood up and rode the Bodhisattva Barbarian. His body followed the unsheathed sword and retreated step by step. 6 hours later, Lu Huang's qi was exhausted and his tendons were broken. However, he still couldn't stop the nameless sword from trembling. In the next 6 hours, it was the city lord's third disciple, Linya, who took over the responsibility of blocking the sword. Linya was 32 years old and was also a beauty on the rouge scale. Her figure was as tall as the men from the northern lands. Her figure was majestic and had a unique charm that made people gasp in amazement. She was the world's #1 fist master. However, no matter how hard she punched the sword, she still couldn't stop the sword from moving forward at a constant speed. For the last punch, Linya soared into the sky and smashed down. The buildings within a radius of 100 feet below the sword were all smashed into pieces. The violent Linya obviously couldn't accept this result. She ran like crazy and carried a large cauldron back from the martial arts field. She smashed it onto the sword as if it was a joke to her. She still couldn't do anything. Linya sat on the ground dejectedly with a dull look in her eyes. Then it was the Qi Refinement Grandmaster Gong Bang's turn. As the oldest among Wang Xinji's 4 disciples, Gong Bang was bald and had 9 rings on his head. Instead of wearing a kasaya, he wore a Taoist robe. It was rumored that he possessed the physique of a Buddha's Vajra, but he also possessed 6 types of Taoist finger mystic arts and was proficient in Qi Refinement mystical arts. Gong Bang's moves were indeed dazzling. He didn't come into close contact with the sword like his junior martial brother Lu Huang and junior martial sister Linya. Instead, he stood in the inner city's pavilion. Every time he waved his sleeves, he would pick up a weapon from the wall. As a result, the martial emperor city had to listen to 6 hours of thunderous sounds of bells and drums. Some of the citizens with weak inner strength were in so much pain that they wished they were dead. They all ran out of the city to seek refuge. Gong Bang waved his 107 sleeves and picked up 107 weapons. 70 to 80% of them were destroyed in the collision. In the end, the sword was less than 20 feet away from the pavilion. The entire martial emperor city felt that even if the city lord were to personally make a move, he wouldn't be able to block the sword from entering the pavilion unless he used all his strength. Afterwards, Wang Xinji's eldest disciple, Grumyu, who rarely showed his face, stood in front of the sword. However, no one saw what really happened at the top of the city wall. Only after the outcome was revealed and the rumors were spread that Grumyu had struck out with his saber and blocked the unreasonable sword that sought not to be fast but to be slow. In fact, Grum did not bring his saber at all. Instead, he floated in front of the long sword and slowly circled it. When the tip of the flying sword was less than 6 feet away from the attic, he stood in front of the long sword again, closed his eyes, and gently pressed his 2 fingers on the tip of the sword. At this moment, on the top floor of the attic, there was a scene that no one could imagine. The burly old monster Wang in hemp clothes and shoes stood at the window overlooking the city. Inside the attic sat the monster who ate swords. What was even more amusing was that the atmosphere in the attic was not tense at all. This was because the old monster-eating sword was sitting cross-legged and drinking a pot of wine. A half-squatting girl in green was pulling at the old monster's white eyebrows and tying them together seriously. The expression on her small face was unusually serious, and her movements were even more meticulous. The old monster-eating sword, whose real name was no longer known by the Jianghu, was not angry. Instead, he smiled and allowed the little girl to mess around. The way he looked at her was a little strange. When Grum's feet left the ground and his body was suspended in the air, his 2 fingers finally pressed the tip of the sword down by half an inch. Wang Xinji nodded, turned around and sat opposite Sui Xiegu. The little girl in green raised her hand and shook the knot made by the white eyebrows. She smiled brightly at the city master of the martial emperor city as if she was asking for praise. Wang Xinji, who had never smiled in front of his 4 disciples, smiled slightly and waved his hand. The little girl in green shook her head. Obviously, the white eyebrows of the old grandpa were more interesting. She continued to squat and tie the knot carefully. The old monster-eating sword smiled and said, "You've done your best for Li Chungang. It's just that with his stubborn temper, he doesn't care about the reincarnation of Buddhism. He doesn't want to be a free and unfettered celestial being, nor is he willing to continue his fate in the afterlife. Li Chungang is Li Chungang. A lifetime of grievances, a lifetime of injustice, a lifetime of justice. This is the sword god that even you, Wang Xinji, are willing to admire. Li Chungang will die in every lifetime, so the green robe of Fengdu will die with him. As for Dong Tai, even if he returns from visiting immortals, his sword skills and sword path won't lose to Li Chungang. To you and me, he's still not as appetizing as Li Chungang." Wang Xinji said indifferently, "Grum can only borrow the remaining power of half of building Wild Forest Crow Palace to block half of your sword. Why did you stop this sword?" The old monster-eating sword ignored him and lowered his head to smile at the little girl in green. "Little girl, go to the wall and get a good sword for this old grandpa to drink with." The little girl, who looked full of spiritual energy, raised her head and made an "oh" sound. She jogged out and obediently raised her butt to lie on the city wall. She pulled out a long sword with some difficulty and carried it back into the pavilion while holding the sword hilt with both hands. Xianxia laughed heartily. He broke off an inch of the sword tip with 2 fingers and threw it into his mouth. Seeing the little girl in green looking at him eagerly as if she was craving for food, the old monster-eating sword laughed. "Don't learn from this old grandpa to eat swords. Otherwise when you grow up you'll scare away men." Xianxia saw that the child continued to focus on his white eyebrows and said to Wang Xinji, "Since you let a few disciples block my sword, it's obvious that you don't want to fight with me. It's fine, I don't have the confidence to win now. I reckon that Dong Tai will be back soon. Compared to fighting with you, I'm more interested in knowing if it's worth it for Li Chungang to lend him his sword from 10,000 miles away. If I win against Dong Tai when he's at his peak, my chances of winning will be higher if I fight with you. However, according to your temper of not rejecting anyone, why would you let your disciple show his face like this? You don't look like an old man who's about to die. Why would you do something like entrusting an orphan to someone?" Chapter 965. Wang Xinji said calmly, "I'm waiting for the final battle. After that, I will ascend. After I leave, Wu City will cease to exist." At first, Han Xingxian wanted to learn from Gao Shulu and slaughter all the first grade 3 realm experts in Jianghu. Many scattered people fled to the city. After that, there was a rule that no one from Wu City would be included in the rankings. Among the 4 disciples including the groom, I plan to send Gong Bonk and Lu Huang to the capital, Linya to Nanjiang. As for the groom, I still haven't decided. However, Lu Yi will most likely be taken care of by him. Xiegu stared. "From your tone, the final battle won't be between me and Dong Tai. It also won't be Chao Changqing. Could it be Tuoba Bodhisattva?" Wang Xinji sneered. "That northern barbarian? Eating dust behind me. As long as I, Wang Xinji, am alive, he won't be number 1 in the world. His martial arts cultivation now is only Wang Xinji's from 30 years ago. Even if he takes that weapon, it's only me from 20 years ago. What's there to fight?" Xiegu was puzzled. "Qi Xuanzhen didn't want to fight with you. Later, Hong Shixiang, who had a chance to fight with you, also committed suicide. However, from what I see, these two, even one person, can't compare to their status 500 years ago. I'm afraid that for 500 years after Lu Dongshen, you Wang Xinji were invincible. For example, Lu Songtao, the sect leader of Zhulu Mountain whom I helped guard, was slightly inferior to Li Chungang. 200 years ago, Wu family sword immortal master Wu Doubing was a hero who made a name for himself. He dominated Jianghu for 40 years. At most, he was another Lu Songtao. 400 years ago, the great demon Gao Shulu caused a catastrophe and killed all the top experts in Jianghu. Although he was skilled, he was only slightly stronger than the current Tuoba Bodhisattva. Today's Jianghu is very different from before. You, Tuoba Bodhisattva, Li Chungang, Dong Tai, and that white-clothed woman, any one of you, other than Gao Shulu's Jianghu, would be invincible in 100 years in Jianghu. Of course me too. Wang Xinji sneered. It's all Huang Longshi's fault. The girl in green suddenly ran to Wang Xinji and asked curiously, Grandpa, why don't you call yourself this old man? Wang Xinji rubbed her head and pointed at Xianxia Valley. She smiled and said, This fellow is more than 20 years older than grandfather. However, he is only older and does not have much ability. Xiegu blew his beard and glared. He broke a section of the sword and threw it into his mouth. He said angrily, Wang Xinji, why don't we fight now? Wang Xinji merely glanced at Xiegu and ignored him. The two white eyebrows of the sword-eating old man that had been tied into countless knots instantly straightened and fluttered in the air. The girl in green was anxious when she saw this. She quickly ran over and pulled down the two long eyebrows that were taller than her. She hugged them and continued to tie the knots patiently. Xiegu sighed helplessly and asked, Do you think that Chen Zhibao can defeat the Gu Jiantang after he used the Dragon Tree Monk's death to become a Confucian saint? Wang Xinji shook his head. Xiegu said with a puzzled expression, This kid is extremely talented and rare. Why did he go to Great Peace City to become the Minister of War? Why didn't he become a king and become a vassal of Western Shu? He would have a good state of mind and time to improve his cultivation. Wang Xinji smiled and said, Chen Zhibao is equivalent to the Confucian saint Chao Changqing who died in West Chu to revive the country. When the time comes he will be able to borrow the momentum and win against Gu Jiantang. Only then will he have the right to fight me. Sui Xiegu was stunned and then sighed deeply. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Wang Xinji was silent. Sui Xiegu smiled and asked, let's not talk about the 10 people who are already in the martial arts rankings. Who do you think will be able to rise up in the next 50 years? Wang Xinji closed his eyes and said slowly, in terms of swords, Liu Baijie, whose Tangxi sword was eaten by you, originally had a good swordsmanship. However, he was a late bloomer and became the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. Wang Xiaoping was originally on the wrong path, but now he is inseparable from Liu Songtao. He has both Q-sword and Buddhism. His future is limitless. Qi Xianxia in the city used to be half a celestial at Mount Longhu but did not have a chivalrous character. After going to Mount Wudong and leaving the mountain, he has changed greatly. Wu Luding is too focused on winning and will not be able to go as far as the female sword servant Cui Hua. In terms of the blade, Yuan Zuozong will definitely reach the celestial phenomenon realm. It is just a matter of time. As for Jiang Fuding, it's hard to say. His character is too evil, but because his martial arts path is the most similar to mine, if he is unlucky he will stay in Shenji for the rest of his life. If he is lucky, when I ascend he will have a chance to become a land celestial. The head of the Wu family sword tomb, Su Yambing of Bailiang. The two from Mount Lantua and Guanyin do not have a high chance of becoming the world's #1, but they have a chance to become land celestial. There are too many variables in the Jianghu now and I dare not predict their final achievements. However, these people will at most be in the top 10. It's just that their positions are different. However, there are 2 people who are especially unpredictable. Nangong Push of Tide Listening Pavilion, who uses a blade, and Xianxia, the princess of West Chu, who has already comprehended the sword. However, the latter is likely to be a flash in the pan. Sui Xiegu remembered a name, Jiang Fuding? Wang Xinji said calmly, do you know my wish to practice martial arts? Sui Xiegu frowned slightly, but the little girl was dragged by the snow-white eyebrows. Ancestor Qi Jian turned his head and smiled apologetically. The girl in green smiled back and waved her hand to indicate that it was fine. Wang Xinji placed her fists on her legs. Do you know that Li Chungang, Yu Tuoba Bodhisattva, Dong Tai Chao Changqing, your realms are not much different from mine. Why do you want to fight to the death? Why are you sure that you will lose? Sui Xiegu laughed angrily. Isn't it because you have thick skin? The girl in green covered her mouth and laughed. Wang Xinji looked straight at Sui Xiegu and asked, do you believe that I can still kill all of you if the few of you join forces against me? Sui Xiegu narrowed his eyes. He obviously did not believe it. But he had to believe it. Wang Xinji stood up. The top floor of the attic had no walls or windows blocking the east and west. Hence, one could see the east sea from the east. Wang Xinji said softly, after I, Wang Xinji, became an earth immortal from the martial Tao and not the heavenly Tao, I have always called myself the second in the world. Not everyone in the world can fight to the death with me. The reason for this is because I missed the Jianghu when Li Chungang was invincible. At that time, Wang Xinji looked up to that sword-wielding green robe and was convinced. It was him who made me understand the meaning of the Jianghu. It was Li Chungang who made me walk the path that I have walked for 60 years. If the Jianghu thinks that I am the second in the world because I am mocking the world, I will not deny it. Whoever has the ability can come and be the world's #1 in their eyes. Sui Xiegu waited for her to continue. Wang Xinji smiled, but more importantly, the enemy in my heart is the entire world. Wang Xinji clenched her fists. Above the East Sea, the tides rose and fell. So even if the 9 people behind Wu Ping and all the rank 1 experts in the world gather at Wu Wu City, I, Wang Xinji, will not be afraid of losing. I will only win. Sui Xiegu pulled his eyebrows out of the child's hands. The girl in green jumped up and down, trying to catch the 2 white eyebrows. Wang Xinji loosened her fists and stood with her hands behind her back. The East Sea returned to calmness. If Jiang Fuding did not die in Bailiang, he would have the spirit to be the enemy of the entire Jianghu. Only then would he have the awareness to be the enemy of the world. At that time, the Jianghu would be his and Nangong Push Jianghu. At most, there would be a Hongjingyan. You Suaxia Valley are hung up on your sword. Chao Zhangqing is hung up on the woman who observed the chess. You all have your own obsessions in your hearts. Instead, you are not as relaxed as the heartless Jiang Fuding. However, your obsessions are coincidentally the foundation for you to become top martial artists. What is even more helpless is that even if you can disperse everything and rise again, you are still unwilling to give up. Sui Xiegu mocked. Do you think everyone is a martial arts fanatic like you? Gao Shulu had only reached the legendary celestial immortal realm by deliberately causing her cultivation to go berserk. Old Master Wang, you really are a monster. I am puzzled. Why didn't any divine immortals come down to subdue you? If not, a few thousand bolts of lightning would be enough to strike you to death. Wang Xinji laughed it off. Divine immortals? Forget about Dharma form. They could even kill ordinary earth immortals. Wang Xinji did not even care about them. Even if their real bodies came to the human world, they would still have to follow Wang Xinji's rules. Sui Xiegu wiped his brows with his fingertips and asked, "Then who are you going to fight the last battle in the human world with?" Wang Xinji asked back, "Who did you borrow your sword from?" Sui Xiegu raged, "T. Do you think I don't know how strong that Su kid is? He was able to kill Han Xingxian because of my 1,000-mile sword manipulation. If he focused on the Jianghu, he might be able to reach my level. But he has to be the king of Bailiang. How can he be like you, Wang Xinji, who is so focused on martial arts? Not to mention 10 years, even if you give him 100 years, he will not be qualified to be your opponent in the last battle." Wang Xinji said calmly, "I was pushed back 1,000 feet by his 2 punches." Sui Xiegu's eyes widened. The girl in green also widened her eyes. The old and the young were exactly the same. Wang Xinji said slowly, "If he dares to step into the divine immortal realm, I will kill him immediately." Chapter 966. The Tuma Pass was especially cold this year. Although it wasn't to the point where young people were frozen to death, there were still some lonely old people in the villages near the pass who managed to survive the winter with great difficulty. However, they didn't manage to survive the cold that was said to be the gates of hell by the common people. However, this kind of silent death wouldn't cause any waves. Anyway, if they didn't die in the turmoil of war, they would die of old age on their beds at home. Who would be willing to care about them? Only some retired old soldiers could be casually arranged by the government. They could be considered to have died of old age. Compared to Liang, they were already very lucky. The two rode to the Tuma Pass and rested for a while before leaving the pass. Taking advantage of the lingering charm of the Lantern Festival, the pass market was still quite lively. The children were all staring intently at the old crow playing chess and other games. The travel-worn Su Fengyin was chewing on a big flatbread as he led the horse forward. His sharp eyes saw a familiar-looking chubby boy among the children. He walked over and lightly kicked the chubby boy's butt. The boy was so engrossed in watching that he didn't even turn his head to look at the thing that kicked his butt. The chubby boy angrily turned his head and was about to curse when he saw that it was a handsome young master leading a horse and carrying a sword. He was stunned for a moment before finally recognizing that it was the knight who gave him a meat bun. He quickly stood up and saluted according to the etiquette taught by the private school teacher. The Su Fengyin smiled and asked, "Where's Yu Song? Didn't he play with you?" The chubby boy looked around and said with a smile, "He was here just now. Song Zi came to the market with his mother to buy some satin. Now his mother must have pulled him away by the ear. Young master, do you want me to help you call for Song Zi?" Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "No need. I have to leave the pass immediately. You can go back and tell Yu Song when you see him." Then he saw the chubby boy swallow his saliva and stare at the half-eaten meat bun in his hand. Su Fengyin smiled and said, "If you don't mind being bitten by me, take it." The little fatty smiled shyly and shook his head vigorously. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of 2 sabers of different lengths hanging on the young master's waist. He became even more envious. Su Fengyin handed the child a meat loaf. While the child was chewing on the meat loaf, he mumbled, "Young master, I heard from my father that it is very difficult to come out of the closed door now. It seems that there are many soldiers outside the Fallen Horse Pass. Around the end of the year, not many people have entered the pass." Su Fengyin smiled and said, "I have some connections with the officials who are in charge of closing the door, so I am not afraid." The chubby boy smiled innocently and said, "I knew it. Young master, you must be a big shot. Pine Zi often talked about you in the private school, but no one believed him. Only I helped Pine Zi and said together with Pine Zi that you are a hero who roamed the Jianghu." Su Fengyin rubbed the chubby boy's head and turned to leave. Behind him, the chubby boy immediately bragged to his playmates about how familiar he was with the young master who had a horse and a saber. Most of the children who had studied together in the private school did not believe that he was with Zhao Yusong. Now that they had seen the chubby boy get half a meat loaf as a reward, this friendship could not be faked. The chubby boy's Jianghu status suddenly rose by several levels. The military parade of the Bailiang Frontier Army had been held for nearly 20 years. It had always followed the old rule of holding a small military parade every year and a big military parade every 3 years. However, last year's big military parade was delayed to this year for no reason. It was also set at the beginning of spring, which had never happened before. 2 rules were broken in succession. In addition, the scale of this military parade was particularly large, which made many border soldiers feel an unusual atmosphere. The small border pass, Tuma Pass, was small, but there were many bodhisattvas. If Deputy Commander Zhou Xian and Han Tao, who had the meritorious rank of hanging Bao Commandant by his side, wanted to smoothly enter and exit the pass, especially if the goods were valuable, they had to be careful of these two sworn enemies. At this moment, the local tyrants of Tuma Pass, Zhou Xian and Han Tao, were standing respectfully on top of the wall. They did not even dare to breathe loudly. Not to mention the two local tyrants who had just entered the ranks, even a dragon would obediently lie down. This was because beside them stood two big bodhisattvas who could decide a person's life and death with a single word. The deputy commander of Yuzhou, Shi Qiangao, and the special commander of Yuzhou, Li Guiweng, were both third-rank officials. At this moment, Han Tao and Zhou Xian, these two old enemies, no longer had any intention of making things difficult for each other. They could only pinch their noses and cooperate, thinking about how to deal with this mission. They did not have the ability to know the inside story. They only received news that an important person was coming out of Tuma Pass. Deputy Commander Zhou Ziru, the son of Deputy Commander Zhe, had the status of a border soldier, so he was also able to stand on top of the wall and wait. However, he was very far away from the two powerful officials of Yuzhou. This border general, who had once almost wiped out the fish dragon gang in an instant, cautiously glanced at Shi Qianggao's bright armor, as well as Li Guiweng's official uniform patch embroidered with a peacock design. His eyes were filled with awe and passion. Shi Qianggao was a veteran general. He was old but vigorous. This time he was the most promising candidate to become a general of Yuzhou. In the end, Huang Fucheng, who was only a military officer at that time, beat him to it. The people of Tuma Pass were trembling with fear, mostly because of this reason. They were afraid that Shi Qianggao, with his fiery temper, would vent his anger on them. On the other hand, Li Guiweng had always been as amiable to everyone as the rumors said. When climbing the wall, he intentionally walked behind Shi Qianggao and took the time to exchange a few warm words with Zhou Xian and Zhou Ziru. For some reason, Zhou Ziru carefully noticed that even General Shi Qianggao, who had a completely different personality, was somewhat nervous. This time they chose to read Beiliang at the mouth of the gourd. Chu Lushan, the governor of Beiliang, had already arrived outside the pass. Yan Wenwan, the commander-in-chief of the infantry, and Yuan Zuozong, the commander of the cavalry, had already arrived outside the pass early. The new nobleman of Beiliang, great ancestor Gu, as well as the general of Liangzhou and his two deputy generals, who were not part of the border army, had also rushed north on the third and fourth day of the first lunar month. Even the administrator of Beiliang, Li Gongda, was no exception. It could be said that almost all of the big shots in Beiliang had arrived at the mouth of the gourd around the Lantern Festival. Zhou Ziru could not guess who could make Shi Qianggao and Li Guiweng treat them so cautiously. Although the general of Yuzhou, Huang Fucheng, who did not have a solid foundation, was half a rank higher than them, he should not have such prestige. At Tuma Pass, Shi Qianggao and Li Guiweng were naturally waiting for His Royal Highness. Actually, Su Fengyin could have entered the Tumbling Horse Pass earlier, but he was stopped by a wandering Taoist, who shamelessly wanted to tell his fortune and palm. He swore that not only did he not want to pay if his fortune was not accurate, he even had to pay for it. Su Fengyin calmly glanced at Su Yanbing. For the first time, the latter did not immediately give an answer. Su Fengyin was somewhat amused. To be able to make Su Yanbing unable to tell the depth of the Taoist, either this sloppy Taoist really did not have any internal energy, or he was a heavenly phenomenon expert who was good at disguising himself, or he was directly an earth immortal. What a big prize. Su Fengyin smiled as he followed the shifty-eyed old Taoist to sit in front of a roadside stall. He went straight to the point and teased, "Old Jinren, with your appearance, it's very difficult for people to believe that you're an expert." The old Taoist sighed and said, "It's just like my name, it's all given by my parents. What can I do? I'm really hungry and cold, so I have no choice but to set up this stall to make a dangerous living as a fortune teller. The secrets of heaven cannot be revealed, but if I don't earn money, I'll starve to death. I'm using my life to exchange for a life. No matter how you look at it, it's still a bitter life." Su Fengyin was about to speak, but the old Taoist seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. He sighed and said, "Only when the secrets of heaven leak out one can it revolve endlessly. This one, in my opinion, is myself. Therefore, young master, please don't ask me why I'm good at fortune-telling, but I can't tell my own fate." Su Fengyin smiled and said, "Old Jinren, let's not talk about other things, but your observation skills are quite good." The old Taoist who called himself Four Directions stared and said, How is this observation? I've clearly seen through your thoughts. The right time, the right place, and the right people. I can calculate the heavens, the earth, and the human heart. I'm different from those immortals who came from the ancestral court of Taoism. I don't calculate the heavens, I only calculate the human heart. Chapter 967. Su Fengnian was surprised and said with a smile, then I'll have to take the opportunity to ask Taoist master. If Buddha cannot be said and Tao cannot be said, then how can ordinary people become Buddha and attain Tao? The old Taoist and Su Fengnian sat across from each other across the stall. He twirled his beard and said, I won't talk about the truth of words, but I'll just talk about some of the truths I've comprehended. How about it? Young master, you don't care about trifles, but you can be more magnanimous when it comes to big matters. I think you can calm down and listen to me. Su Fengnian nodded and said, okay. He turned to Su Yambing and said, go buy a tray of steamed buns. The old Taoist nodded with satisfaction. It was unknown whether he was satisfied with the tray of steamed buns or that the young master in front of him had finally entered the trap. When Su Yambing silently turned around, the old Taoist straightened his clothes and said slowly, cultivation is like climbing a mountain. The more you walk, the harder it is. Mount Longhu only wants to reach the top, as if it would be a disgrace to their ancestors if they don't have an ascended Taoist every 60 years. This is not right or wrong, but Mount Wudong doesn't cultivate this kind of Tao. I don't know when it started, but people only focus on the word longevity. What's the difference between this and being an official and looking forward to the word first rank? For us, cultivation is like reading books. Just like those novels about scholars and beauties that young masters read, in the end, it's still about getting to know each other at first sight. Reading those novels about scholars and beauties, in the end, it's still about getting to know each other at first sight. If you're lucky, you'll be in love with each other until your hair turns white. If you're unlucky, you'll hate each other and leave each other. If you're more explicit, a person's life is even more miserable. It's just about life and death. It's too boring to think about it this way. What do you think, young master? Su Fengnian smiled and nodded, I think so too. The old Taoist continued, in my opinion, when a person is reincarnated, the essence of walking is the word walk. Walking through mountains, rivers, Jianghu, east, west, north and south, it doesn't matter where you go. Along the way you'll meet interesting people and boring things. Whether it's suffering or enjoying happiness, it's all just once in 100 years. When you meet a good scenery, you can stop and take a look. When you have strength, you can continue. If you don't want to move, then don't move. Gentle and soft, heroes grave? Those are just people who can't eat grapes and are complaining that they are sour. Why do you say that they only admire mandarin ducks and not immortals? I've been in this world for a long time. A day, 1,000 years, 1,000 years in the world, 1,000 years, a day, 1,000 years, 1,000 years, a year, 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 a year. But I to be a year, I to, and I 8. In my life I've been to more than 600 Taoist temples, big and small. I've also been to more than 300 temples to seek advice from the monks about Buddhism. Seeing that Su Fengnian was silent, the old Taoist coughed and reminded him in a low voice, young master, you should say something to make sense. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I'm busy calculating how old you are now, old Taoist master, to be able to finish visiting the 600 Taoist temples and 300 temples. The old Taoist shook his head and sighed, I've long forgotten. I only remember that I married 3 women. Su Fengnian couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. At this moment, Su Yambing brought back a tray of steamed buns and placed it on the stall. The old Taoist picked up a steamed bun and blew on it fiercely before swallowing it whole. His face was filled with intoxication as he lifted his sleeve to wipe the oil stains on the corner of his mouth. He smiled and said, my muscles and bones are frozen in spring and my meat is frozen in autumn. Even if I'm young and vigorous, I'm not afraid of the cold in spring. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, old Taoist master, can you calculate who I'm going to meet? The old Taoist master was about to grab the second steamed bun when he said casually, old woman painted gray. Su Yambing's breath froze. The old Taoist master was still indifferent. He smiled softly and said, in the Jianghu it's never a burden to have more skills. That's why I know a little about everything. I only know this because of my age. It's not much of a skill. Su Fengnian said calmly, I know who you are, old Taoist master. It's just that Taoist master doesn't seem to follow the rules if he doesn't show his face. What? Do you want to avenge your Beimang Empress by using my head to repay the debt of Su Huainan and Diwu Raccoon's heads? The old Taoist smiled and said, do you really know who I am? Su Fengnian frowned and said, I'm really confused. I heard that Li Xiaoxin of the two Zen temples had already pulled down the hovering mountain to crush the Qilin immortal who was carrying a sword. The old Taoist master laughed and flicked his fingers on his left shoulder. A young Taoist with a charming appearance floated out of his right hand. He was about 27 or 28 years old and carried a long sword on his back. He bowed to Su Fengyin with his hands folded. The old Taoist flicked his fingers and another old Taoist floated out from his left. He had a sage-like demeanor and held a horsetail whisk in his hand. He twirled his beard and smiled. This Qilin immortal had clearly been killed by Tuoba Bodhisattva at the Yellow River after crossing the river. The old Taoist master who had been sitting on the stool clapped his hands and a young Taoist priest ran out in front of him. It was the child who appeared beside the king of the north courtyard, Su Huainan. The old Taoist master held a bun in one hand and stroked the little Taoist boy's head with the other. Su Fengyin, this is the second time we've met. The scene here was strange but the passers-by on the street were unaware of it. The old Taoist master swallowed the bun and clapped his hands. He smiled and said, the 3 state advisors of Beimang were killed by Li Xiaoxin, Tuoba Bodhisattva and Ilio respectively. They were only dead but not dead. It's not enough for outsiders to know. After killing the 3 corpses and pulling out the 9 worms, the saint did not explain it in detail. The people were confused. I wandered around and thought that it was the reason of my past life, present life and future life. These 3 Qilin immortals of the Tao sect were me and not me. I was them without a doubt. They were very busy but I was very free. I was so free that I wandered around Beimang for 360 years. I was so free that I saw the 3 married women slowly grow from young to old women. I was so free that I even met the 4th ancestor Lu. Su Fengyin seemed to not know what to say and could only reach out to take a bun to calm down. He did not expect that the young state advisor who was playing around his knees would slap it away. He felt a burning pain on the back of his hand. Su Fengyin was stunned and quickly waved his hand to signal Su Yambing, who was already filled with murderous intent, to not make a move. The old Taoist master knocked on the little immortal Qilin's head and bent down to pick up the bun and pass it to His Royal Highness. Reading books and chasing the deer. How much you gain from reading books is how much you lose from chasing the deer. Taoism is to Qingshan. There is nothing outside Taoism but Qingshan has something. I'm called Taoist Master Sifang. My real name is Yuan Qingshan. I've been cultivating for 360 years and am about to ascend. I do have a favor to ask of you today. Su Fengyin reached out his left hand to take the bun and did not tremble at all. Yuan Qingshan said seriously, I'm asking for a copper coin from His Royal Highness for a nameless disciple of Taoism's sect. Su Fengyin held the bun and did not move at all. The old Taoist master smiled and said, Your Highness can reply after tasting the bun. Su Fengyin hesitated for a moment and followed the old Taoist master to swallow the bun in one mouth. He slapped the copper coin on the stall. The old Taoist master picked up the copper coin and flicked his finger. The copper coin flew thousands of miles away. Standing up, the 3 Qilin state advisors merged into the body of the Taoist master with the surname Yuan. Before the sloppy old Taoist left, he left 4 words of advice. Your Highness, go to Mount Wudong more often. It's beneficial and harmless. Su Longxiang was destined to die. Before I ascend, I'll leave him a chance to live, but it's only a chance. Jianghu was originally a celestial. Why did he come to the mortal world? You'll die if you underestimate Wang Xianji, who won't lose to Jianghu in the future. After Li Yufu used up his merit and fortune to help others ascend, he killed all the immortals fishing in the clouds. Therefore no one in the world can ascend. People in the mortal world do things in the mortal world. I, Yuan Qingshan, am not as good as Wudong's Li Yufu. Chapter 968. Everyone left, leaving behind only Su Fengyin and the bamboo drawer without soup dumplings. That Taoist priest Sifang from before was like the 3 Qilin spiritual masters who came out from the one Qi turning into 3 pure ones. No matter who appeared in front of him, they could all be regarded as Northern Mang's national advisor. Su Fengyin knew what it meant to hand over the copper coin. He was in a daze and his mind was filled with the 4 sentences. Wudong Mountain was Su Fengyin's blessed land. If it wasn't for the old chief Wang Zhongluo's big yellow court, he wouldn't have been able to leave the 2 Jianghu. Now with Li Yufu in charge of Big Lotus Peak, Wudong was showing signs of resurgence. However, after the wanderer he told Li Yufu about the child he saw by the river. Li Yufu hadn't returned yet, so he didn't know if he had found the child. On the top of Bull Landing Snow Plateau, Xianyuan Jingqing warned him not to let Huang Man enter the celestial phenomenon state. With Su Fengyin's temperament, let alone the celestial phenomenon state, he didn't even dare to let Huang Man or enter the mysterious finger state. Therefore he directly told Su Longxiang that he was not allowed to enter the mysterious finger state, which was only one step away from the celestial phenomenon state. As for the so-called slim chance of survival mentioned by Immortal Qilin, Su Fengnian didn't know what it was. As for himself and Wang Xianji, Su Fengnian didn't think too much about it. Yuan Qingshan's last prophecy said that Li Yufu would kill all the immortals who sat on clouds and fished after helping people to ascend, closing the gate of heaven for the cultivators in the world. From then on, immortals were immortals and the world was the world. Whether they hated each other or loved each other, they would be out of reach. Su Fengnian was even less interested in this. As long as the reincarnation of the bull rider could ascend before then, there would be no problem. Family affairs, state affairs, and the world affairs. Since he was Su Zhao's eldest son and had the surname Su, these three matters were already mixed up. For other vassal princes, the hereditary succession was the end. At worst, their father's vassal prince would be demoted to a county prince. However, to the north of Beiliang, there were millions of Beimang soldiers eyeing them covetously. Su Yambing said softly, "At such a close distance, if Yuan Qingshan wants to kill your highness, I may not be able to stop him." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "That's why I asked Uncle Su to buy this tray of buns to let Daoist Qilin know my sincerity." Su Yambing felt a little regretful. If it weren't for the fact that Her Highness needed to protect him, it would be a waste if he didn't try his hand at the national preceptor of Beimang, who was undoubtedly a land immortal. Su Fengnian stood up abruptly. Purple and gold alternated on his face, glistening with multicolored light. He said bitterly, "I've wasted a lot of time. I'll have to trouble Uncle Su to send me to Tumbling Horse Pass." Su Yambing also noticed the abnormality of his royal highness. He smiled and grabbed Su Fengnian's collar. With a shout, he threw him towards the top of Tuma Pass. On top of Tuma Pass, Lingzhou's Deputy General Shi Kangou and Li Guiweng looked at each other quietly. They could see the uneasiness in each other's eyes. As a result, the bold and unrestrained Shi Kangou became more and more anxious. This was because Li Guiweng was a famous clay bodhisattva in Lingzhou. He rarely showed any signs of panic. Both of them were the general's confidants. Back then, Shi Kangou almost died in the battle at Jianghu River. It was Su Xiao who pulled him out from the pile of corpses. After guarding him for 2 days and 1 night, Shi Kangou actually returned to the world of the living. He always said that he owed the general his life. Later on, as the second son of the commander of the Partridge Battalion, Shi Liping died on the battlefield, but Shi Kangou never regretted it. Li Guiweng came from a local tyrant family in Beiliang. He belonged to a branch of the tyrant Luo Yangli. For hundreds of years, regardless of whether it was in peace or war, there would always be family members who would go to the ancient city of Luoyang to pay respects to their ancestors. After Su Xiao became the vassal of Beiliang, the Li family was the first to seek refuge with the Su family. Li Guiweng was good at making speeches and was highly recommended by the tide-listening pavilion's Li Yishan. However, the Li family did a stupid thing and broke off their relationship with the Beiliang's chief strategist. Shi Kangou and Li Guiweng's anxiety gradually spread to Zhou Xian and Han Tao's side. If an accident really did happen and it implicated the Northern Liang Grand Reading, they, as Deputy Captain Zhichong and a chaplain with a miscellaneous rank, would not be able to shoulder this enormous responsibility. Shi Kangou was like an ant on a hot pan. He turned and walked in circles on the city wall, his right fist pounding the center of his left hand. Li Guiweng was slightly better, but he also stood on his tiptoes and looked into the distance. The number 1 son of the Tuma Pass, Zhou Ziru, gave his father a look. Zhou Xian quietly came to his son's side. Zhou Ziru asked in a low voice if they needed to send out roaming cavalry to investigate the situation. As a result, he received an angry glare from his father. Zhou Ziru quickly came to his senses. This kind of secret military intelligence was not something that they could blindly meddle in. It was an official's career. If they did not do it, they would not be able to achieve anything. However, if they did too much and made too many mistakes, they would lose their official status. The city wall shook violently. Li Guiweng staggered and almost fell. He rubbed his eyes and seemed to have seen something crash into the city wall. Was it a boulder thrown by a siege vehicle? Shi Kangou quickly walked to the edge of the city wall and stuck his head out to take a look. His eyes widened. A person had been embedded into the city wall. Moreover, this person seemed to be alive. Su Fengnian, who had fallen into the hole, let out a long breath of purple-gold mist. He felt much more comfortable. He left the hole in the wall, grabbed onto the wall with one hand and gently floated to the top of the city wall. Zhou Xian and Han Tao acted as if they were facing a great enemy. They quickly pulled out their sabers and were about to capture this unknown assassin. The elite armored soldiers below the city wall also rushed to the top of the city wall. Unexpectedly, Xianxia and Li Guiwing, who were of the highest rank, immediately knelt down and greeted His Royal Highness. This was especially true of His Excellency's skill in rolling up his sleeves. It showed his foundation. Not only did it not affect his natural and smooth appearance, it also gave people a sense of cautiousness and respect. If a civil official wanted to reach this level, it was impossible to reach this level without being at least a fifth-rank official. Zhou Xian and Han Tao naturally could not flatter him. However, when they heard the words His Royal Highness, they were so scared that their legs went soft. They took the opportunity to kneel down and report their official positions. They shouted with all their might, using all of their energy. The two of them were deliberately competing to see who could shout louder. Li Guiwing's ears were like exploding thunder. This His Excellency from Yuzhou didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Su Fengyan smiled and had everyone rise. He saw Zhou Ziru. Back then he had worn a mask to enter and exit Tuma Pass. This eldest young master Zhou naturally did not recognize him. The two children, Zhao Yusong and Little Fatty, were only able to recognize him because they relied on his saber and voice in a daze. Su Fengyan exchanged a few polite words with Xianxia and Li Guiwing. When he walked down from the top of the city wall, Su Fengyan deliberately summoned his courage to have his son follow him. He wanted to get as close to His Royal Highness as possible to get familiar with him. He also did not expect to be able to talk to His Highness. He would be satisfied with just a casual impression. Unexpectedly, His Royal Highness turned his head and opened his golden mouth. Zhou Ziru, when I entered and exited Beimeng last year, I passed by Tuma Pass. I know that you lead troops well. When I return, I will tell Huang Fujin to let you be his personal guard. What do you think? Chapter 969. Zhou Ziru was a high and mighty general in the Fish Dragon Gang, but evil people have their own ways to deal with evil people. In front of His Royal Highness, the evil dragon of Bailiang, he was not even a shrimp soldier or crab general. He was so shocked that he was no longer as tactful as before. Fortunately, Vice Captain Zhichong Zhou Xian had been through ups and downs in the officialdom for a long time, so he still had some composure. He hurriedly pulled his son to kneel down and thank him. Everyone in the world knew that there was a party in Bailiang who would often have outstanding achievements in the future. The general's adopted son, Qi Dangua, and the richest man in Qingzhou, Lin Quan, were both flag-bearers of the Bailiang cavalry. Being the personal guard of a big shot had the same effect. Huang Fujin was now very influential in Yuzhou. As long as Zhou Ziru became the confidant of the general of Yuzhou, Zhou Xian would not worry about his son not being able to bring glory to the family. Su Fengyan asked Zhou Ziru to follow him. Zhou Ziru walked as if he was walking on thin ice. Su Fengyan asked with a smile, "Is there a gang in Lingzhou called the Fish Dragon Gang that often passes through Tuma Pass?" Zhou Ziru's heart tightened. With his outstanding memory and extra attention that he could not tell others, he nodded and said in a deep voice, "Your Highness, if I remember correctly, the Fish Dragon Gang has passed through Tuma Pass 6 times. The last time they came out of Tuma Pass was when it was snowing, and they entered Tuma Pass 2 days after the winter." Su Fengyan nodded and did not comment. This made Zhou Ziru worried. Could it be that the Fish Dragon Gang was involved with the spies of Beimeng? Last time, the Fish Dragon Gang overturned their boat in the gutter. After that, for the sake of the Fish Dragon Gang, the Tuma Pass turned a blind eye to many expensive goods entering and leaving Tuma Pass under Zhou Ziru's instructions. In this world, information was blocked. Even if some urgent military information was sent through the courier route, it was possible that it would sink like a stone into the sea, let alone other small news. Su Fengyan completely fell out with Zhong Hongwu, the great general of Huaihua, in Longqing Prefecture of Lingzhou Province. It was a big deal and everyone knew about it. However, few people in Yuzhou knew about it since it was in the Fish Dragon Gang. The main reason was that Lu Nirong, who took over as the gang leader, never mentioned His Royal Highness. No one in Longqing County dared to gossip about this matter. In the past, it did not matter if they mocked His Royal Highness, but now even old General Zhong Hongwu and with him. With him? Fortunately, His Highness did not let the father and son of the Zhou family tremble in fear for too long. Before coming out, he said to the 2 local gangsters of the Tumbling Horse Pass, "I have a friend in the Fish Dragon Gang. Deputy Commander Zhou and Mr. Han, please take care of him in the future." In the future, His Highness would be so valuable that he would only be inferior to the one sitting on the dragon throne in the capital. Since His Highness had spoken, Zhou Xian and Han Tao naturally agreed. Deputy General Shi Chenggao of Yuzhou would accompany him to the pass, but Li Guiwen did not need to. When he heard that His Highness would give him a precious flower painting from the southern Tang monarch, Li Guiwen smiled from ear to ear. It was true that the flower painting was very valuable, but if it was given to him by His Highness, Li Guiwen would have great confidence in the officialdom of Yuzhou. When His Highness mentioned the painting, His Highness mentioned the governor of Yanji County, Hong Shandong, and said that he heard this person had a good official reputation. Watching the three riders leaving, Li Guiwen stroked his beard and muttered to himself, "His Excellency doesn't think highly of Hong Shandong or find him an eyesore." As Hong Shandong is the favorite student of the provincial governor of Liangzhou province and is a prefectural governor himself, Li Guiwen couldn't control him even if he wanted to. However, now that he's favored by His Excellency, Li Guiwen didn't mind doing some icing on the cake. Hong Shandong always intended to be a scholar of classics in Yuzhou province so as to be transferred to the hub of the officialdom of Yuzhou province. However, he had been blocked by the provincial governor of Yuzhou province over these years. Although Li Guiwen was an auxiliary official of the provincial governor, he was not a vassal of the provincial governor. As Li Guiwen had a good relationship with some important officials of Yuzhou province who had the same rank as him, it was possible for him to promote Hong Shandong together with him. Offending the Yuzhou provincial governor and currying favor with His Royal Highness, which was more important. Li Guiwen, who was a hardcore crop of the Su family, did not need to think too much about it. Inside the pass, a young lady was being dragged by a child towards the tumbling horse pass with quick steps. The child with delicate features was still muttering to himself, "Mother, if we don't go faster, Su Gongzi will come out of seclusion." The young woman, who could be considered outstanding among the women in Rouge County, pursed her lips and hummed. She told herself that she just wanted to tell young Master Su that she owed him 200 taels of silver. Most likely she could pay him back faster as long as she agreed to work for the Jianghu Weaving Bureau and became a weaver. However, the villagers all say that Lingzhou is rich, but there are many hedonistic sons. There are as many of them as there are hairs on a cow. Especially our northern Liang's crown prince, who is the most lecherous. He is currently in Lingzhou as some Lingzhou general. If one of them takes a fancy to her, what should she, a girl who has left her home and has no one to rely on, do? But what about Yusong? She also did not know why the Jianghu Weaving Bureau, which she had never heard of before, took a fancy to her craftsmanship and said that they wanted her to weave clothes. If it were not for the old and kind-looking official of the Weaving Bureau, the young woman, Su Qing, who had been widowed for many years, would have rejected them. How could riches and honor compare to the stability of mother and son for a rural woman like her? In the end, the mother and child did not see young Master Su's figure at the deserted city gate. Zhao Yusong had a face of regret and squatted on the ground, sulking. It was unknown whether he blamed his mother for walking too slowly or if he blamed himself for not being strong enough. If he had known earlier, he would have run over himself. The young woman bent down to pat the child's head and said apologetically in a soft voice, "Yusong, it's mother's fault." The child was sulking, but he could not bear to make his mother feel guilty. He raised a brilliant smile. She said softly, "Mother has thought it through. In a few days I will go to the Weaving Bureau in Lingzhou and return the silver to that young Master Su as soon as possible. Mother will hire people to take care of the crops. You can focus on studying in the school." Zhao Yusong had a bitter expression and did not know what to say. He wanted to say that he did not want his mother to leave, but he knew better than anyone that once his mother had made up her mind, it was useless to persuade her. In these years, so many mothers-in-law and aunts had come to persuade his mother to remarry, but his mother had not nodded. In reality, he really wanted to gather the courage to tell his mother that if she met someone she liked, then she should just marry. He actually did not mind as long as his mother was happy. Zhao Yusong stood and looked at the top of the city wall. He muttered to himself, "Mother, why do you think young Master Su is going outside the pass?" Su Qing shook her head and did not speak. They simply rode out of the pass on 3 horses without any armored cavalry guards. However, Shi Chenggao was not worried at all. He had the general's retainer Su Yambing by his side. Also, on this trip to the gourd there would be countless scouts along the way. He believed that nothing would go wrong. Moreover, it was said that His Highness was an expert who had killed the king of the northern courtyard and the leader of the Ruran cavalry. Who would dare cause trouble here? For some reason, Su Fengyin stopped his horse. He reined in his horse and turned to look south. Tuma Pass was only a black dot in his field of vision. Su Fengyin raised his head, took a deep breath and closed his eyes. The early spring sun was warm. There was no wind or snow and the world was peaceful and peaceful. Before he went to Beimang he had been drinking with Su Shao at the top of Mount Qingliang. Under the influence of alcohol, he had impudently said to Su Xiao, "If you're old, then you're old. Don't sneak around and die." At the time, Su Xiao had readily agreed, saying that he had not yet held a grandson and could not bear to die. He had even bragged that he did not want to die and that even the king of hell did not have the guts to take Su Xiao's life. However, Su Fengyin could see more than anyone else that Su Xiao was growing older with each passing day. He was so old that even when the father and son climbed the mountain together, they needed to stop and rest. Before becoming a father, most young people would find it very difficult to imagine that their father could be old or that old. Su Fengyin opened his eyes and continued riding north. After all, nearly 100,000 Bailiang cavalry who had participated in the Great Reading were waiting for him. There was a saying that Su Fengyin had never said to anyone, and Su Xiao was no exception. If Bailiang was trampled by Beimang's hooves one day, then Su Fengyin would definitely have died on the border. If he were to die, he would die north of Su Xiao's grave. Chapter 970. A simple and crude carriage leisurely went south. It first visited the three military towns of Gentleman's Mansion, Maolong, and Li Valley outside the military town of Wuxia. Last year, the border of the southern dynasties was filled with gunpowder. The Bailiang cavalry crushed everything along the way like a hot knife through butter. However, to everyone's surprise, they did not occupy the military towns in order to push the border to the north to resist the Beimang cavalry. Instead, they looted all the goods and craftsmen and left. They did not even bother to destroy the cobweb-like post roads on the border. Obviously, they were not afraid that the Beimang would smoothly launch an attack on the border. The carriage went past the three towns. It was a scene of desolation and panic. The owner of the carriage occasionally lifted the curtain expressionlessly. Then the carriage turned east and rushed to the lower city of Liuwa at the border of Longyao Province and Yuzhou Province. The city's governor, Tao Qianji, died suddenly during the Qingming festival last year when he was visiting the tomb. The carriage did not enter the city. It went straight south and approached the border of Liangmang. The owner of the carriage seemed to be in a good mood. She sat behind the coachman and leaned against the thick cotton curtain. She held a pot of homemade glutinous rice wine and drank a few mouthfuls. Then she sang a familiar high-pitched song. The desert was vast and the carriage seemed to be lonely. The old woman's song was not gentle at all. Instead, it was soul-stirring. The coachman was an ordinary-looking short and stout man. However, he had long arms like an ape holding a whip, which made his figure look ridiculous. The middle-aged man was serious in speech and manner. During this time, the old woman touched his back with the wine pot. The man did not turn around. He just shook his head, indicating that he did not drink. The old woman was not annoyed by his lack of tact. After singing the song, she raised her head and drank a mouthful of rich glutinous rice wine, showing her heroic spirit. However, when a Jianghu heroine acted like this, others would applaud her, but when a white-haired old woman acted like this, no one would find it pleasing to the eye. The old woman probably knew the coachman's indifferent nature and did not expect him to respond. She looked at the distant sky and said to herself, "You men have money and power and all like to keep women in a golden house. As for me, I have a hobby of raising literary heroes. My ability to raise soldiers is stronger than the old emperor of the Zhao family." In literature, first there was the king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan. Then there was the imperial tutor Taiping Ling. Then there were the old and famous scholars of the southern imperial court. In military there were the 12 generals including Yang Yuanzhan and Lu Gui. All of them had outstanding military achievements and they were all in my hands. In the 6 battles where the two sides used the power of the entire country, we lost 2 and won 4. If we were not caught off guard by Lame Su of Bailiang last year, no one in the Liang court would not fear the iron hooves of Beimang. But this is also good. After the disturbance caused by the Bailiang cavalry, Liang began to underestimate our Beimang. Great Peace City quickly took away that kid, Gu Jiantang, as the Minister of War. The blue-eyed girls moved to tilt taxes to the north finally began to face heavy obstacles. The people in the center of the capital were not united, which was a good thing. In my opinion, the reason why the new Minister of War, the villain too, did not pay any attention to this, and even intentionally or unintentionally suppressed the generals of Gulu and allowed the court officials to make things difficult for the blue-eyed girl was because he was secretly happy to see the war in the north erupt everywhere. It was not enough for him to decide the spring and autumn with one battle. If he fought again he would decide the world. This kind of ambition, to put it bluntly, is the ambition of a wolf. The white-clothed soldier Immortal's thoughts and appetite are far greater than his adoptive father's. No wonder he is a young man who has been scolded as a wolf. If he was in our Beimang, I would already have a headache with the ambitious fatty Dong. If he was added, how would I deal with the 3 of you? Wouldn't I be worried to death? That's right, Hong Jingyan, who came from the same chess and sword music school as Taiping Ling, is also quite ambitious. It's just that between him and Dong Zhuo, only one of them is destined to rise up in the southern dynasty. I have already rewarded him with all the Ruren cavalry from the 3 towns of Rochuan, Laohuai and Wuchuan. It's about the same as Dong Zhuo's current military strength. If he still loses, he can only blame himself for only having the good fortune of being a Jianghu master and not having the fate of a ruler of the world. However, to be honest, the fatty Dong's conduct in life is quite likable. The blind Hong Jingyan is detestable at first glance. Tuoba, you will definitely die much later than me. If the one surnamed Hong really dares to collude with the imperial clan and try to become the emperor behind the scenes, then regardless of whether you retire or not, you will still kill him. The man said calmly, Dong Zhuo is also capable of such treason. The old woman laughed and said, that's not a problem. Who asked me to like this damn fatty from the bottom of my heart? After I ascended the throne, he was the only one who dared to call me Big Sister Emperor. His shamelessness is so cute. Besides, Dong Zhuo is full of schemes, but at the very least he has a bottom line. His bottom line is low, but he still has a bottom line. Such a person is actually not scary. What I am most afraid of are those whose bottom lines are unpredictable. General Zhong Shintong and Murong Baoding are such treacherous people. You will never know what kind of surprise they will bring you or what kind of disgusting things they will do. Hand Beimeng over to Fatty Dong. The Murong and Yelu surnames are not afraid of being cut off. Chapter 971. The man who was called only by his surname fell silent again. The old woman finished drinking the glutinous rice wine in the pot that she had brewed herself. Holding it in her arms, she sighed, when I was young I was homeless and went to Liang and Liao. I saw old cripple Su before he was crippled. At that time I didn't fall in love at first sight. I just thought this man was interesting. Later Su Xiao left Liaodong and climbed to the top step by step. I didn't believe that he was capable of such a feat later. When I had free time to deal with the state affairs, I often wondered how he could stand out among his peers. After a long time I had clearly let go of it, but many years later I picked it up again. I was somewhat unwilling. But this kind of love can only be thought about. If I had to choose again, I would still choose to return to Beimeng. If I really had to spend my life on daily necessities for a man, I would be so bored that I wanted to kill someone. After the Battle of Western Fortress, I even wrote a letter to Su Xiao, advising him to follow the general trend and establish himself as the emperor, so that I could coordinate with him from a distance in northern Mang. I promised that in the future when I went south he would go north, just like when we first met in Jinzhou, when he divided that large flatbread each of us half. Together we divided Liang, ruling from the north and south. But he was unwilling. Of course, when that day came I would also regret it. How could we really rule the world together? Women and vile characters are hard to raise. A woman and a vile character, count as one. So in this world, who can afford to raise me? It's the same even if he's Su Xiao. It's more like I raise him. The old woman sighed, only by sacrificing the 3 armies can we subdue the rebellion and pacify the situation. You and those generals have done well. Only when the people have been reborn can they not be in chaos and have no intention of starting a rebellion. Those old people from the southern dynasty also did well. Unfortunately, the general trend is still not in Beimeng's favor. We have no choice but to seize every minute. Even though northern Mang had won 4 great battles, Liang had only been injured in the sinews and was far from being injured in the bones. With Bai Yen planning the overall situation and joining hands with Gu Jiantang to build the eastern border, Beimeng's advantage becomes smaller and smaller as time passes. When Liang completely devours the spring and autumn period and has enough strength, it will be time to beat our neighbor to death. Therefore, before I die, no matter what the outcome is, I must take advantage of the return of the peace decree to fight. As for whether to ally with Liang or Bailiang, I was still hesitating. Both sides had their pros and cons. Helian Wuwei, Huang Songpu, and the other old fellows all insisted on attacking Liang first. For example, in the past, the old emperor of the Zhao family had listened to Yuan Binshi's advice. He didn't hesitate to bite down on West Chu first, and then went to devour South Tang and West Shu. When the conditions were right, success would be as easy as lifting a finger. However, Taiping Ling and a large group of young and strong generals, including Dong Zhuo, insisted on taking Bailiang first, and then annexing western Shu and southern Zhao in one go, forming a confrontation between the east and the west. Only then would it be safe. However, after Qin Jibao showed signs of vassal of western Shu, of the 2 dynasties, only Taiping Ling and Fatty Dong remained firm in their views. Many people felt that since they had to face Su Zhao's 300,000 cavalry and Chen Zhibao guarding western Shu, it was better to go to Gu Jiantang alone on the eastern front to take advantage of the situation. As for me, when it comes to fighting for favor in the imperial harem, even Zhao Ji of Great Peace City has to learn from me. However, when it comes to matters that affect the life and death of a dynasty, it is laughable to say it out loud. In reality, it is often just based on a woman's intuition. That year in Jinzhou, Lame Su said that as long as he encountered a difficult and troublesome matter, he had an easy way. He tossed a copper coin and guessed right or wrong, and listened to the heavens and did as he wished. Do I have to toss a copper coin too? Toba, do you have one on you right now? The middle-aged man probably felt that it was absurd. This time he didn't even shake his head. His body didn't move at all. The old woman, who didn't refer to herself as I in front of him, laughed self-deprecatingly. With your simple personality, why did you get angry by the Yellow River and kill our Qilin Jinren? The man laughed coldly and said, pretending to be mysterious. If we weren't in a hurry to go to the icy plains of the northern region, the 3 pure ones and the imperial advisor Yuan Qingshan would have been killed so that His Majesty wouldn't have to worry. The old woman dismissed it with a laugh. She hugged the old fur coat that someone had dug out with great difficulty from the bottom of a chest. She said softly, Li Yang learned from our Beimang how the imperial court should interact with Jianghu. Back then, when Su Xiao stepped into Jianghu, it was a strenuous and unrewarding task. The imperial court, Jianghu, and Su Xiao, who was used to being the scapegoat, didn't have a good ending. If an emperor with power personally went to compete with martial artists, not only would his status drop, but he would also ruin his reputation. It would be better to let the Jianghu people fight to the death for him. That would be the best method. However, even if you support several influential Jianghu families, you still have to be careful not to let them become too big to get rid of. A powerful family that produces talented people in large numbers is no different from an arsenal in your own backyard. If the spearhead is pointed at your back, you will suffer even more. The cart driver frowned and said, what about the Dao De sect and the chess and sword music school, who are the leaders of Beimang's Jianghu? The old woman played it down and said, one strives desperately for immortality, the other strives desperately to get involved in the secular world. They both have weak ribs and can't stir up a storm. Even if I give you, Tuoba Bodhisattva, 20,000 troops and horses, you still can't deal with them? The man nodded. The old woman shook the wine pot. That woman and Murong Baoding's illegitimate son hidden in the spider's web. If it weren't for the great calamity in Liyang this time and being beaten back to his original form, I would have almost been fooled by Li Mibi. However, this old man also has his difficulties, so I won't argue with him this time. No wonder previously I couldn't find him even if I scoured the ground 3 feet deep. Turns out he was hiding right under my nose. A section of willow, a good section of willow, really a section of willow. As soon as you plant a willow, you will become a shade. You have the ability to cut the grass but not pull out the roots. Regarding this secret scandal involving the imperial family, the man naturally wouldn't comment on it. In his entire life he, Tuoba Bodhisattva, was only interested in learning martial arts and leading an army. Whether it was beauties or official positions, they were all dispensable worldly possessions. The Empress of Beimang looked at the color of the sky and laughed softly. In the past, the Zhao family wished that the Su family's child would die early so that he could be reincarnated. They waited until he didn't die prematurely. Furthermore, they were certain that this kid had the same one-track mind as lame Su and wouldn't betray Beimang. Now they were happy to squeeze out a smile, waiting to see Beiliang's 300,000 armored cavalry fight until not a single one was left alive. In any case, their Zhao family was profiting no matter what. If this kid was a little more cunning and revealed a little bit of disloyalty, he wouldn't dare to betray Beimang if Liyang forced him into a corner. Then they wouldn't have to work so hard. But then again, if this kid was such a smart king of Beiliang, Beimang wouldn't be a threat, and Chen Zhibao most likely wouldn't leave Beiliang. Whether or not the next king of Beiliang would be supporting the Western Front would affect whether or not Chen Zhibao could conquer the world in one battle. Otherwise, the Zhao family was the best at getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. No matter how highly regarded he was by the current emperor of Liyang, he could only be a retired king of Shu who had no more than 30 to 40,000 elite soldiers. Being relied upon by the emperor but not being trusted by the emperor wasn't a fortunate thing. It would only be a disaster. This emperor of the Zhao family is good at everything, but he's too narrow-minded. He's not even comparable to a woman like me. The stubborn lame Su deserves to have such a new master. Beimang's god of war, Tuoba Bodhisattva, spoke without restraint. He said calmly, If I were Su Xiao, I would have gone with the flow after the white-clothed case. The Empress of Beimang smiled faintly and said, "That's why you'll never become a man that Wu Su Zhaoji and I can't forget. A man's occasional childishness, murderous aura and Buddhist aura that seems to make people respect him are actually just icing on the cake. Only brotherly loyalty and human feelings are things that help people in their hour of need. A man who doesn't even care about the basic friendship doesn't even look at women like us. In this world there's never a lack of smart people. Only fools who don't want to live an easy life are rare. Su Xiao is a butcher, the king of Beiliang, but he's also a fool. Unfortunately, this old fool who's always smiling and looking at the world is going to die of old age after meeting you and me." Chapter 972. I asked for a 3-day leave. Originally, I should have resumed the update yesterday, but I was late by 1 day. Therefore, other than this 7,000-word chapter, there will be another chapter around midnight. This month and next month I will have to work hard to repay the debt. Everybody is looking forward to it. You are also welcome to whip and urge me with all your strength. P.S. Happy New Year. The mouth of the gourd was vast and boundless. An extraordinarily majestic martial arts platform was temporarily built. 3 li to the east and west of the martial arts platform, respectively, there was a military review building for Beiliang's meritorious old generals and civil officials, 1 civil and 1 military forming a temple and a great hall supporting each other. Among them, the civil building had 6 floors, 1 floor higher than the martial building. This made the scholars who were successively ascending the civil building to feel somewhat honored in their hearts. Inside the building, there was no lack of Beiliang civil officials with superior ranks. Other than the newly appointed governor of Lingzhou, Su Beiji, the governor of Yuliang had already ascended to the top floor, leaning against the railing and gazing into the distance with the administrator Li Gongda. However, the one closest to Li Gongda was not the governor of Liangzhou, Hu Kuei. It was also not the governor of Yuzhou, Wang Peifong. Instead, it was 2 fresh faces, the Chancellor Wang of Shangyin Academy and the one who was originally supposed to take up a post at the Imperial Censorate in the capital, wearing a high hat and broad belt. When the sandstorm hit the building at the frontier fortress, their sleeves fluttered, setting off the 2 old men's fresh and immortal air. According to the law, Hu Kuei was half a rank higher than the governor of Lingzhou and Beiliang. Compared to the old men in the building, he could be said to be in the prime of his life. In his early years he was the commander of the Beiliang army's Liaoju cavalry. Among them, the Great Horse Camp was known for its elite crossbowmen. His military exploits in the Beiliang army were illustrious. For some reason, Hu Kuei was supposed to take over the position of Liangzhou's general within 5 years. However, 8 years ago, he unexpectedly led 300 light cavalry to break into the hinterland of Beimang's Beimang Jibua military town without permission. Afterwards he lost his official position. Only then did Qin Jibao, who took over the Liaoju cavalry, have the world's first-class scouts, who were able to suppress Liao Dongzhuo's crow's nest. However, after Hu Kuei lost his official position, he was deserted by his friends and family. Unexpectedly, he gave up the military and entered the civil service. He started as a civil official in Liangzhou. In a short 7 years he unexpectedly became the governor of Beiliang. In private, the officials of Beiliang laughed and said that it was unreasonable for a person who had been peed on several times to be revived. Wang Peifong, the governor of Yuzhou, was a pure scholar. He had always been at odds with Hu Kuei, who had been in the military for 20 years. Almost every year he went to Mount Qingliang to have an audience with the king of Beiliang. Every year he would complain about how Hu Kuei, a veteran ruffian, was unruly and how he allowed his subordinates to bully the officials of Yuzhou. Unlike the eccentric Hu Kuei, who stood alone on the far right of the top floor, since Wang Peifong could not get close to the administrator and the 2 old men with good reputations in the imperial court, he would exchange polite greetings with some famous scholars of the Jixia Academy. He would say some comforting words about going back to the country and talk about the most popular poems in the literary world. Hu Kuei was wearing a gorgeous official uniform of the 1st rank of the 3rd rank. This governor of Liangzhou lived up to the name his parents gave him. He was tall and sturdy and was half a head taller than the men of the northern region. There were many civil officials and scholars on the top floor. Most of them were thin, which made Hu Kuei stand out from the crowd. After Hu Kuei got on the top floor he did not greet anyone. He stood by the railing and looked into the distance. The yellow sand was rolling and the fierce troops of Beiliang were lined up in battle formation. Hu Kuei's eyes were in a trance. If it were not for the disaster that year, he would also be among them and even be qualified to stand there to review the troops and practice martial arts. Hu Kuei moved his eyes and looked at the martial arts platform. He held the railing with one hand. Among the civil officials of Beiliang, the governor of Liangzhou was second only to the king of Beiliang. He sighed softly. A young scholar who was personally introduced by Mr. Wang of Shangyin Academy to Li Gongda to make himself familiar, was named Yu Luandao. Even when he talked to the administrator, he was neither servile nor overbearing. His character was slightly distant, which made the scholars of the two places at the back of the top floor criticize him for not knowing the severity of the situation. He was really too arrogant because of his talent. Yu Luandao wore a jade belt and a long saber. His face was like jade and his appearance was extraordinary. Under the trampling of countless horse hooves, the building gave people a feeling of shaking. Many scholars from other places saw the cold military appearance of the Beiliang cavalry and their faces turned pale. Yu Luandao's expression was still calm. While Huang Shang was discussing with the administrator whether they could allow the establishment of the academy and the Scholars Association, Yu Luandao silently walked to Hu Kuei's side and did not say anything. The two stood side by side and looked at the battlefield. The two were silent for a long time. Unexpectedly, it was Hu Kuei who was in a high position who spoke first. He said calmly, "You must be the eldest grandson of the Yu family of Yinyang. On the first day of studying at Shangyin Academy, you shocked the world with a single brilliant feat and solved the 6 questions of heaven and earth left by Huang Sanjia." The second master of the Song family once made a monthly comment and also commented that Yu Luandao's words carried zen and could satisfy one's appetite. If you enter the imperial court, you will have a meteoric rise. If you are in the wilderness, you will inherit the literary vein. Even our second commandery princess highly praised your poetry. The reason why I, Hu Kuei, paid attention to you is because you once wrote the 48 words of Liangzhou's Big Horse Song, to pay tribute to the Big Horse Camp. I thank you on behalf of the 260 brothers who died. Hu Kuei put one hand behind his back and the other hand patted the railing. He said softly, "Green and yellow, killing wild sheep. Liangzhou's big horse died in a foreign land. Good, very good. Even a boorish martial artist like me can read it without difficulty. Just based on these 2 sentences, even if you, Yu Luandao, asked me to be a 4th-rank official and take office tomorrow, I would be willing to agree." The horse stepped on the green grass and yellow sand, spurring the horse to kill sheep to eat meat, looking back but still not seeing home. Many literati might be able to write about these simple things, but they just don't want to. Yu Luandao was the eldest grandson of the Yinyang Yu family. When he drew lots at the age of 1, he grabbed a copy of the Spring and Autumn Annals with one hand and a peerless famous knife Big Luan with the other. When he was 4 years old, he wrote poems and became famous all over the world. When he was 14 years old, he carried a book and carried a knife to study at Shangyin Academy, attracting the attention of the world. He was also one of the young talents that made the Liang imperial court feel the most heartache and annoyed. Because of this, the Yu family was angered by the Zhao family's emperor and was miserably suppressed in Guangling. Yu Luandao lowered his head to look at the knife and then raised his head to look into the distance. With a warm smile on his face and a determined look in his eyes, he said, "General Hu, I came to Beiliang this time not to ask for an official position from you. I just want to see His Royal Highness with my own eyes. Then I will have no regrets in this life. I can't stand the arrogant and willful noble families that break the law, the pretentious imperial college, and the imperial court that gets rid of the hounds after the hares have outlived their usefulness. Only your highness is pleasing to the eye. I also want to ask your highness, if one day Beiliang can't defeat the million iron cavalry of Beimeng, does Su Fengyin dare to die on the battlefield? Does he dare to guard the northwest gate for the central plains? If Su Fengyin is willing to nod his head, then in the future I, Yu Luandao, will be added to the pile of corpses. We scholars seek fame in peaceful times and study in troubled times. We use our deaths to exchange for peace for the people." Hu Kuei said calmly, "I'm afraid that you scholars have high standards but little ability. On paper you talk about good soldiers but under the paper you are just a bag of straw." Yu Luandao heard the Liangzhou provincial governor's words, which spoiled the mood, and laughed instead. "I'm also afraid of this. So after the military parade and martial arts training, I'm going to join the army and be a pawn. Whether I'm a mule or a horse I'll know once I walk it. But along the way, I've seen many graceful northern beauties who are not like the Jiangnan women. They are tall and have bold personalities, very much to my liking. Before I die, I have to marry such a tall wife so that I won't let down this life in Beiliang. Yu Luandao doesn't have any elders here. When I send gifts to a woman's family, I hope that official who can do it for me." Hu Kuei didn't comment and said something even more ominous. "I, Hu Kuei, don't have any great abilities but I'm good at collecting corpses. If you, Yu Luandao, die one day I'll collect your corpse for you." Many scholars on the top floor were standing in the building. They didn't have the right to come to the corridor and stand by the railings. Seeing that this eldest grandson of the Yu family was able to join in on the fun with the administrator and chat happily with Liangzhou's general Hu Kuei, their eyes were red with envy. Yu Wandao's laughter was somewhat ear-piercing. They didn't know that this disciple of a famous family had come to Beiliang to seek death. Snowflakes fell sparsely and gradually grew. Beiliang was bitterly cold. As long as it snowed, there was no stopping it. It was destined to be a never-ending snowstorm. Yu Wandao reached out a hand to catch the snowflakes. His 5 fingers were white and slender. If he were in the rich Guangling Road, whether it was playing the zither, holding books, or placing chess pieces, he would be able to make women fall in love with him. Hu Kuei sniffed. There was still an hour before the examination of this martial arts university. He was originally a first-class crossbowman, and he had many incredible and diverse skills. Among them, he had the ability to smell the breath of the dead. Compared to relying on experience to determine the time by observing the sky, it was more accurate. As for the principle of Taoism's ventilation of the mountains and lakes, carrying Peng Ai to dig pits and burn them, and using this to look for the breath of the well to find water, it was an unorthodox skill that the Northern Liang army had to be proficient in. It was indeed not without reason that the Su family's iron cavalry set off at the beginning of spring and autumn, and the reason why Zhao Shi was so afraid that he could not sleep and eat in peace was indeed not without reason. Not only were there many fierce generals under Su Zhao's command, but the rogue immortal craftsmen who were proficient in unorthodox methods also made it difficult for the other great generals of Liang to catch up. Hu Kuei suddenly pointed at the martial arts platform in high spirits and said with a smile, "Yu Wandao, after an hour, why don't you open your eyes wide and see who will be there? Then you'll know whether Beiliang's 300,000 iron horse cavalry can withstand Beimang's 1 million cavalry." Chapter 973. The Wu Tower in the west was 1 floor lower than the Wen Tower. This caused a large group of old warriors who had been scolded by the Liang imperial court as the old men of Beiliang to gather together and curse. They all said that it must be His Royal Highness's rotten idea. Otherwise, the great general wouldn't have slapped the old faces of his subordinates like this. There were many mountains in Beiliang. Other than the 2 old generals Yan Wenwan and Zhong Hongwu, most of the young and strong generals under Qin Jibao had left Beiliang for Western Shu. However, many of the old generals from the previous generation had a close relationship with Qin Jibao. Most of them had the title of general above them. They only had their families to feed, so they wouldn't cause trouble and choose to stay in Beiliang. Other than these 3 mountains, there were also the great general's adopted son and many old generals who had retired from the cavalry and infantry. These old generals couldn't be compared to the group of generals who had been given the title of general. They still had many branches and leaves in the Beiliang army and had a deep foundation. The Wu Tower was originally arranged according to seniority like the Wen Tower. Those with high positions would stand on the tall buildings. However, it was a bit strange today. A one-armed old man with the surname Lin who drove an ox cart out of seclusion didn't want to go up the tower. Many of the old men of the same age who had been through life and death with him didn't want to go upstairs to show off their power. They surrounded the first commander of the Lotus Seed Camp, Lin Dofang. Although Lin Dofang had resigned and lived in seclusion after following the Su family to Beiliang and had been a nameless field showing for almost 20 years, everyone knew that Lin Dofang and the great general had been through life and death together. Moreover, they had almost become relatives by marriage. In addition, when the old soldier respectfully sent the crown prince to the capital, Lin Dofang had also appeared outside Liangzhou city. At that time, the ox cart old man, the former Yuzhou general Jean Partridge Zhou Kong, and the commander Yuan Nanting who controlled most of the white feather cavalry were also among them. Lin Dofang had always been popular in the Su family's army. After he had resigned, there were no more conflicts in the officialdom. This time his retirement seemed even better. Even some of the old generals who were not familiar with him back then were happy to chat with him. Even Lu Yuanji, who had retired from his high position as the deputy commander of the infantry, and Wei Taizhan, who had just vacated the deputy commander of the cavalry last year, were no exception. This group of old fellows with illustrious military exploits had seniority, meritorious service and family background, so they were especially outspoken when they talked. Compared to the genteel and sour atmosphere in the Wen building, they were like heaven and earth. At this moment, Lu Yuanji was cursing His Royal Highness for not being sensible. It was fine that the Wu building was 5 floors higher, but it was actually 1 floor lower than the Wen building. Wasn't this deliberately embarrassing these old fellows who had fought for Beiliang? Lu Yuanji had retired from his position for a few years, and he was also famous for his impatience and uncouth temperament. Hearing his curses, All the old men around him, without exception, smiled knowingly. Wei Taizhan, who had just left Beiliang's army for less than a year, was much more reserved. He didn't even respond. Once Lu Yuanji rolled up his sleeves and cursed, even the country's shrew would have to retreat. Especially after drinking, he dared to spit on General Su Zhao's face. Of course, General Su Zhao was so angry that he was whipped and thrown out of the tent to drink the northwest wind. At that time, General Su Zhao, who didn't look like an old man, was also stubborn. After being thrown out of the tent by General Su Zhao, he refused to go back to the tent to rest. He sat on the ground and continued to curse. When he was tired, he fell asleep on the ground and snored like thunder. In Lu Yuanji's words, "I don't want to be angry with General Su Zhao and I don't dare to. I will use my snoring to disturb General Su Zhao's sleep." Lu Yuanji was still angry after cursing His Royal Highness for half an hour. He wanted to use His Royal Highness bullying of Huaihua General Zhong Hongwu in Longqing County as an excuse. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Wei Taizhan curling his lips and winking at him. Just when he was puzzled, he was punched hard. Lu Yuanji was stunned. He turned around and was punched in the face again. His nose was bruised and his face was swollen. Lu Yuanji finally saw that it was old man Lin's dirty trick. Lu Yuanji was so angry that he immediately punched Lin Duofang's head back. He cursed, "Lin, I've wanted to beat you for a long time. What did you tell me? You said that you wanted to kill the northern barbarians with me. We were born in the same year, month and day. There's no difference between us. We'll say that whoever kills more barbarians will be the big brother. You'll be a coward when you get to Beiliang. Also, when you plan to elope with the princess of southern Tang, who was the one who kept watch for you? What's wrong? I cursed His Royal Highness a few times. Did I get in your way, Lin Duofang? It's none of your business. You're just a coward. I don't know where you've been hiding. You haven't touched a blade for 20 years. What right do you have to call me brother?" The two old men were immediately pulled apart by the other old men beside them. While Lu Yuanji was cursing, Lin Duofang, who was tied up, kicked Lu Yuanji a few more times. He said angrily, "Lu Sen, what you did with me was a mess. I owe you. I'll be your slave in my next life. If you blink, I'll be your grandson. Don't you King drag His Royal Highness into this. Fine, you cursed His Highness. Then I'd like to ask you, when you were whipped and thrown outside by the Grand General so many times, who was the one who secretly brought you good wine to drink? Who was the one who listened to you telling those bullshit stories for the whole night? Who was the one who personally told me that the Grand General had a good son and even said that he would marry a few daughters to that kid in the future? Lu Sen, are you Lu Sen? Now that you've become the deputy commander of the infantry army, you think you're so great? Don't think that I don't know that your son has taken over a few government salt pans. He's not just making a lot of money every day. Not to mention salt pans, he even dares to kill government soldiers. You Lu Sen are amazing. You have 3 sons who are even more powerful than His Highness. His Highness only killed the king of Jing and in Zhao Heng's cavalry in Qingzhou. He also killed the 5th raccoon of Tibing Mountain in Beimang. He never dares to kill the people of Beiliang. Lu Sen, do you believe that I'll go to the Grand General and ask for an official position? I won't do anything but kill those bastards of yours who call me godfather." The old general, who was called Lu Sen, was stunned. Then he became furious and scolded, "T. Lin, tell me clearly who killed the soldiers of the Salt household and the Armor household. My son wouldn't do such a heinous thing." Lin Dofang somehow got the strength to break free from the pull of Wei Taizhan and the other old men. He punched Lu Yuanji's face again. "The whole of Beiliang knows. Only you, an old fool with bad eyesight, don't know." The ground floor of the martial arts building instantly became silent. Lu Yuanji looked around. Wei Taizhan was still calm and silent. Many old men avoided the gaze of this Lu Sen. Finally, Deputy Commander Lu's lips couldn't stop trembling. He waved his arms and didn't want anyone to help him. He sat down on the ground and panted heavily. Lin Dofang was still angry. He wanted to step forward and kick Lu Yuanji. Fortunately, Wei Taizhan hurriedly held him back. Only then did they manage to stop the old man who built the Lotus Seed Camp. The scene inside the building was enough to stun any outsider. Chapter 974. Lin Dofang took a deep breath and patted the back of Wei Tieshan's hand. The latter slowly let go of his hand. Lin Dofang sat in front of Lu Yuanji, facing him. He turned his head to look at the snowy sky outside the tower and sighed softly. "Lu Sen, an old way we old people with half a foot in the grave always talk about how we helped the great general conquer the world and protect the country. I know that you are not greedy for riches and honor. To you, it is enough that your descendants have no worries about food and clothing. Any more is the good fortune that you worked so hard to save in the past. You think that this is the good fortune that your descendants deserve. You are most afraid that Bailiang will forget what you have done in the past. You are afraid that people will forget about it. But if you are like this, your descendants who have never suffered will have nothing to fear. No matter how good the seedlings were, they will be spoiled by you. His Highness did not do proper work in those years. Who in the tower is not angry? I, Lin Dofang, am very angry. That year, the great general personally came to visit my family's fields. From beginning to end, I was not willing to turn around and see the great general. But let's put ourselves in his shoes. It is fine if Liang does not admit to what His Highness has done in these 2 years. You are not blind. How can you not know what is true and false? Let's feel our conscience and ask, did His Highness lose face for Bailiang when he went to Jing? Xiangfan City, Guangling River, Iron Gate Pass, Beimang's Ruoshui River and Great and City's Imperial Road. Who in the tower can do what His Highness has done? You Lu Sen, who can't even control your son. Or you Old Wei who likes to play the peacemaker as you get older. Or you Han Tuizi, who has only cared about taking care of your disciples and official career these years. Lin Dofang pulled back his gaze and looked at Lu Yuanji. Lu Sen, the great general does not owe us anything. His Highness is even more so. We have conquered the world, but the matter of protecting Bailiang is something that we cannot do. Even if we want to, we can't do it well. Then let's just hand it over to those fellows in the literary tower. So what if the literary tower is higher than the martial tower? In the 9 kingdoms of the spring and autumn period, how many officials and important officials have looked down on our Su family's armored cavalry? We've already made them suffer a lot. If you're worried that your children and grandchildren will be looked down upon, then let them go on their own. Don't let them ride roughshod over you old men. The general's words were crude, but they made sense. No one's son should be born to suffer hardships, nor should they be born to enjoy happiness. He didn't care about other places, but in Bailiang the more capable one was, the more bitter one was, and the more fortunate one was. So Lu Sen, we owe the Su family now. We may not owe them anything, but your children and grandchildren owe them a lot. Lin Dafang patted Lu Yuanji's shoulder and stood up. He bent over and helped Lu Yuanji up, patting off the dust on Lu Yuanji's chest. Lu Yuanji suddenly grinned and said, "Damn it, Lin, I only rewarded you with 1 punch. Look at you, I punched and kicked you several times." Lin Dafang laughed and said, "I told you I'm more capable than you. You have to admit it. If it weren't for our old friendship, I would have used my special skill, crotch kick." Lu Yuanji put his arm around Lin Dafang's shoulder. He wanted to scold him, but when he touched the empty sleeve he stopped talking. Back then it was Lu Sener who had gritted his teeth to bandage his brother's wound. He was too embarrassed to do it in front of Lin Dafang. He only dared to squat on the ground and sob after leaving the tent. That feeling was even more painful than his own broken arm. Lu Yuanji clearly remembered that year when Lin Dafang's arm was broken and the general was seriously injured. That kid couldn't help much, but he stood guard outside the tent with a pale face. In the end, the 2 of them stood guard side by side against the tent. Lu Yuanji, Lin Dafang, Wei Tai's Han, and Han Tuizi walked side by side to the entrance of the martial tower. It was snowing heavily. Although there was no longer the scene of yellow sand covering the iron armor, when they looked up, they could see that the frozen river had yet to thaw. Further north of the ice river, there was only white snow covering the black armor. The 100,000 infantrymen of the Bailiang army were divided into 2 giant battle formations from the east and the west, leaving a path in the middle. The commander of the White Feather Cavalry, Yuan Nanting, was able to get close to the ice river and sit high on his horse. There was also the Lotus Seed Camp, the Horse Camp, the Partridge Camp. The first camp was set up. There were a total of 36 of these old and new camps. They were all lined up in a row looking especially majestic. The crossbowman of the Little Snow Camp, Li Hanlin, was positioned slightly behind. He carried his saber and crossbow, holding his breath and concentrating. Beside him was Lu Do. The 2 of them looked at the martial arts platform together, their eyes burning with passion. There was not a single person on the martial arts platform. Other than a giant war drum, there was nothing else. The war drum had not been beaten, and the horn that the soldiers of Bailiang were most familiar with had not been blown. The martial arts platform, which had stone steps to the north and south, finally revealed the figure of a small mountain. The Protector General of Bailiang, Chu Lushan, appeared in armor for the first time in 20 years. Chu Lushan stood slightly to the left of the martial arts platform, leaning on his saber. The new commander of the cavalry of Bailiang, the #1 cavalry in the world, White Bear Yuan Zuozong, and the famous infantry commander General Yen Wenwan, walked up to the martial arts platform at the same time, one on the left and one on the right. Yuan Zhuozong was known to be a handsome man. Now that he was wearing heavy armor and holding a cold saber, he looked even more imposing. Yan Wenluan was far inferior to the Protector General of Beiliang and the cavalry commander in terms of height. General Yan was short, perhaps even shorter than the men from Jiangnan. He had been shot blind in one eye by a stray arrow on the battlefield. This man, who was neither tall nor strong, had pulled out an arrow and swallowed his eye before continuing to fight. Before the fall of West Chu, the war Saint Yi Baikue was invincible in the spring and autumn 9 kingdoms. Only Yan Wenluan's infantry could fight to a draw with Yi Baikue's great halberd army. The Song and Shu kingdoms were not suitable for the Su family's cavalry to roam freely. This was also Yan Wenluan's contribution. With Yan Wenluan standing there, who dared to look down on him? Then there were the 2 infantry and cavalry commanders, Qin Yunxue and He Zhonghu, who had been deputy commanders with Lu Yuanji and Wei Taizhan for many years. Then there were the 2 new deputy commanders. The number 1 general of southern Tang, great ancestor Gu, and Zhou Kong, who had been promoted to deputy commander after more than 10 years of controlling the Yuzhou army. Liangzhou's general Shi Fu, Yozhou's general Huang Fucheng, and Lingzhou's general Han Laozhan followed closely behind. But why was there no general or king of Beiliang? Finally, Su Longxiang, who was barefoot and dressed in black, led Qi Xuanzhen's black tiger onto the school stage. Chu Lushan, Yuan Zhuozong, Yan Wenluan, Qin Yunxue, He Zhonghu, great ancestor Gu, Zhou Kong, Shi Fu, Huang Fucheng and Han Laozhan. The 10 of them stood in a row with their sabers in their hands. When the second son of the Su family, who had led the dragon elephant cavalry to crush the southern Tang towns of Beiliang, appeared, a mournful and melodious horn sounded. Su Longxiang walked step by step toward the war drum that was half the height of a person. The sound of the Beiliang drum was once the loudest in the spring and autumn western wall. Behind the Beiliang army, there were 800 phoenix battalions with white horses and white armor. When a gray-haired young man changed into a jade-white robe that only vassals of the dynasty could wear, and mounted the horse with a saber and a spear, an old man led the horse forward. The snow-white horse slowly moved a few feet away. The hunchbacked old man let go of the reins, straightened his back and patted the horse's head lightly. Then he smiled with relief. Go. This rider led the 800 Phoenix insignia light cavalry in between the 2 armies, galloping through the sky full of flying snow. The old man looked at the back of the rider, his hands in his sleeves and smiled from ear to ear. Su Longxiang began to beat the drum. The drum sounded like thunder rolling away the Beiliang. That rider didn't step on the surface of the frozen river. Instead, the rider and the horse leaped high into the air. The iron horse leaped over the frozen river. Along with the drum sound, the iron spear in the man's hand suddenly stabbed into the ice river. The entire ice river shattered. After the 800 cavalry stopped their horses, they filled up the line. The man in the robe, who only had a Beiliang saber, got off his horse in front of the school stage, walked up the stone steps and stood in the center. Then he held the saber and shouted, "Beiliang, draw your saber." Beiliang Governor-General Chu Lushan did not lean on his saber anymore. He drew his saber. Yan Wenluan, Yuan Zhuozong, Qin Yunxue, and the others drew their Beiliang sabers almost at the same time. The 100,000 Beiliang soldiers who did not move under the snow also drew their sabers. The snow became even messier. They shook off the snow on their armor and looked even more shocking. The Beiliang cavalry was the best in the world. The Beiliang drums were known throughout the world. Beiliang had a new king, Su Fengyin. Chapter 975. Because it was more than 4,000 words, it was a bit late. The great reading of Beiliang this time was probably the briefest and shortest reading ever since the Su family took over Beiliang in the past 20 years. However, it was also the one with the greatest gathering of generals and talents. The veterans of the Martial Tower were almost in tears as they watched. They knew better than anyone else how difficult it was to gather the hearts of soldiers. The hearts of soldiers were like a person's soul. Once it was gone, it would be difficult to summon it back. For example, no matter how much Lu Yuanji scolded His Royal Highness, he was also worried that the foundation they had worked so hard to build would be squandered away by the prodigal son before it was completely destroyed by the Zhao family. Those who were more utilitarian, such as Han Tuizi, were also worried that the new king would not be able to convince the masses. They could not even convince them verbally, let alone in their hearts. If that happened, would they really have to move their entire family to the Central Plains where enemies were everywhere? Would the Zhao family deal with them bit by bit? If the son of the Zhao family was happy, he would reward them with some leftovers. If he was unhappy, he would cut off a few heads to win the hearts of the people. Therefore, when His Royal Highness, who was wearing a unique jade-white python robe, jumped onto the ice river and shouted, "Draw your sword," 100,000 soldiers of Bailiang unsheathed their swords at the same time. Everyone knew that Su Fengyin would be the rightful king of Bailiang. Therefore these old men were relieved. They even thought that since the general was unable to conquer Beimang in one fell swoop, would it be possible for the young king of Bailiang to succeed? With this thought that had haunted their dreams for many years, they could not bear to die. They were also unwilling to turn a blind eye to their own family's seed being destroyed. In fact, many of the old men were not really senile. For example, Lu Yuanji, they really could not bear to see their children and grandchildren wreak havoc. They just did not believe in the legacy of the Su family. So what if they could take more of the Su family's property into their own pockets? However, from now on they would have to plan carefully again. There were not many twists and turns in the martial tower. After all, most of them were old fellows who were used to seeing battle formations and killing. However, the foreign scholars at the one tower were trembling with fear. In the past, they had heard that the Bailiang cavalry's battle prowess was the best in Liang. As for how powerful they were, they had no idea. If it were those scholars who came from the Yan Imperial Palace and Guangling Taoism who had more or less seen the way the two vassal kings led their troops, they would not believe that the Bailiang's battle prowess was much greater than theirs by a large margin. However, when they saw with their own eyes the black mass of armored soldiers that stretched as far as the eye could see, even if they were looking from afar, the eerie atmosphere was suffocating. Especially when the 100,000 soldiers unsheathed their swords at the same time, it was as if the wind and snow between heaven and earth had to stop. Most of the people in the tower trembled violently. Previously, there were busybodies who had named the generals on the martial arts stage one by one. Each of their names was like thunder to the ears. When the 10 of them stood shoulder to shoulder with their swords, no one believed the nonsense that Bailiang was lacking in manpower. The unspoken majesty on the martial arts stage made the people of the One Tower ask themselves, could Gu Jiantang, who had resigned from the Ministry of War, defeat the Bailiang cavalry? Could the king of Yan Imperial Palace, who was second only to Su Shao among the vassal kings, really contend against them? Even if the man in the python robe who stood out from the crowd could never reach the height of his father as long as he, Su Fengyin, had 300,000 elite soldiers, could he really be bullied by anyone? Yu Wandao did not have these messy thoughts. He only saw the distinctive python robe, the way he leaped onto his horse and threw his spear into the icy river, the slow steps he took as he ascended the stage, and the way his finger moved across the hilt of the famed sword Great Luan. Yu Wandao suddenly felt that there was no need to ask anything. After 2 hours of military parade, everyone put their swords back into their sheaths. The man in the python robe disappeared. General Yan Wenwan went to greet the people of the Wu Tower. Yuan Zuozong, who had the same rank, although he was the general's adopted son and the commander of the cavalry, still walked half a step behind Yan Wenwan. He walked side by side with the famous general of the southern Tang dynasty, great ancestor Gu. Huang Fujin, who did not have enough experience and popularity, was at the back. He seemed a little lonely. He did not have any interaction with the old Yuzhou general, Brocade Partridge Zhou Kong, who was not far away. However, since this person had already occupied a place on the martial arts platform, no one dared to compete with Huang Fujin on the surface. As for the secret, there would certainly be many. The key was to see when Huang Fujin could successfully take over the military power of Yuzhou. Chu Lushan, the northern Liang protector, ascended to the one pavilion. When the foreign scholars saw Fatty Chu dismount from his horse outside the pavilion, they were scared half to death. They also sensed that even the administrator Li Gongda, a major second-rank border official, had a forced smile on his face when he saw this devil who ate people without spitting out the bones. Within the one pavilion, only teacher Wang was able to maintain a calm expression. Huang Shang, a bone-chilling scholar from Liang, simply chose to avoid seeing him and avoid seeing him. When the heavily armored Chu Lushan ascended the building, the new building creaked loudly, causing people to worry about whether the stairs could bear the weight of this man and his armor. Fortunately, this mountain-like fat pig did not bother to waste his energy going up the stairs after ascending to the 5th floor. He greeted Hu Kuei, who had descended to the 5th floor, and nodded to each other in greeting. When he caught a glimpse of Yu Wandao beside the Liangzhou provincial governor, the Bailiang governor returned home. When Chu Lushan finally mounted his horse and left, the scholars felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. If His Royal Highness's notoriety in the past was merely his hedonistic behavior within Bailiang's borders, then Fatty Chu's infamy was enough to make people's hair stand on end. Cutting breasts and skinning skin, breaking skulls and pouring wine, which of these did not deserve the wrath of the heavens? However, this fat pig still happily became the highest-ranking official in Beiliang. Truly only a scourge could live for 1,000 years. On the way back, Chu Lushan summoned the crossbowmen Li Hanlin and Lu Dou. One of them was His Royal Highness's brother, who had grown up with him, and the other was basking in his glory. The Qingzhou Lu family, who was about to become in-laws with the Su family, could not be considered ordinary Beiliang soldiers. Chapter 976. Chu Lushan dismissed the dozen or so trusted retainers behind him, bringing only Li and Lu to the banks of the frozen river. The ice had already shattered. Chu Lushan tugged at the cotton collar of his armor and gazed into the river, remaining silent for a long time. Young Master Li, who considered the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang to be his own home, had interacted with Chu Lushan many times. However, after becoming a crossbowman who often had to exchange his life for the lives of Beimang's Malanzi, when he looked back at this fatty who had once been his arm in arm, he felt a bit more reverence. It was difficult for him to joke around like before. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but rather that he didn't dare. Only those who had personally experienced the flames and smoke of war, who had come into contact with hundreds of enemy troops, knew how ruthless and fierce this 300-catty fat pig was. In the Beiliang army, it was publicly acknowledged that in battles with less than 10,000 soldiers, regardless of how dangerous and cruel the situation was, Chen Zhibao could achieve the greatest military service. Yuan Zuozong could achieve the fewest casualties. As for this fatty, whose literary talent was completely obscured by his fierce reputation, he could bring a battle to a close in the shortest time possible. In the Battle of Baishui, Chu Lushan had once defeated 3,000 Northern Han elites in a short hour. Of his 2,000 troops, 1,800 had died. Chu Lushan had participated in countless bloody battles like this. According to legend, when Chu Lushan led new recruits, he would always congratulate them. Either they would die tomorrow, or they would be promoted to commandant the day after tomorrow and scram to some other place to enjoy life. After Su Zhao's conquest of the border, his adopted son, Chu Lushan, only led troops on the border for the first 5 years. Afterwards he left the frontier fortress. Afterwards, very few people remembered this fat pig. The number of times he was the first of the Su family soldiers to mount the city and plant the flag was the highest. To this day no one had been able to break this record. Chu Lushan thought for a moment before finally opening his mouth and saying, "There are some things that are better left for the king of Beiliang to speak to you personally." When Su Fengyan put on the vassal king's robe and went on stage, it meant that Beiliang had a new king today. Of course this was in serious violation of the Liang family's etiquette. The house of Zhao, who relied on the Su family to sit on the throne and enjoy the country, would dare to say no? Even if the son of the Zhao clan had nothing better to do and wanted to punish the Beiliang, he would have to ask the Beiliang first. Li Hanlin, who had been tricked into going to the southern court and almost kidnapped to Ji province, squatted down and cradled the helmet in his arms. He grinned and said, "Before the great reading, my father was forced to stammer. I'm not stupid. I've already guessed most of it." Li Hanlin continued with a smile, "Brother Nian, I don't like what you're saying. Don't think that just because you're the king of Beiliang, you're no longer Li Hanlin's brother. There's no such thing. In any case, I've decided to follow Brother Nian for the rest of my life. If I make a name for myself and he dares to not give me a big official title, I'll make a scene." Chu Lushan reached out a hand and rubbed Li Hanlin's head. He smiled and said, "It's good to be a crossbowman, but don't die. Otherwise, His Highness will vent his anger on me, the Protector General of Beiliang. Hanlin, you and I are brothers of the same family. I'll say the ugly words first. If you dare to die in front of your father, I will dare to vent my anger on your father." Li Hanlin stood up and spat a few times. He rolled his eyes and said, "Protector General, don't say such unlucky things just because you're an official." Chu Lushan waved his hand and scolded jokingly, "Damn brat, get lost." Li Hanlin ran away without any courtesy. Lu Dou, who was born with double pupils, didn't forget to bow and bid farewell. Chu Lushan looked to the east. East was Great Peace City, the best city in the world. He smiled coldly and said, "What a big piece of fat meat." Chu Lushan lowered his head and walked towards the warhorse. He laughed and said, "Eating meat, our fatties like it the most." In the wind and snow at the border, the two carriages finally met. The carriage drivers were the young man who had just become the king of Beiliang and the Beimang military god, Tuoba Bodhisattva. The man and woman in the carriage, one could imagine what kind of supreme status they had. The Beimang Empress Murong and the old Prince Liang Su Xiao. The carriages stopped at the same time. Su Xiao didn't even bring along the Beiliang's #1 martial artist, Su Yanbing. He only brought along his eldest son who had changed into ordinary clothing. In the end it was still 2 carriages, 2 people against 2 people. Su Xiao bent down, lifted the curtain, and jumped off the carriage. The old woman in the opposite carriage also got off at the same time. Su Xiao glanced at the man who ranked second and then looked at the old woman who came slowly. He laughed mockingly and said, "Murong, you were so pitiful in the past. You were a shameless woman who cried and asked me to eat bread. Now you are so imposing. Tuoba Bodhisattva is your coachman. Look at me, I only brought my son. I can't compare to you." The old woman put on the old fur coat and didn't wear the mink hat. She allowed the wind and snow to hit her weathered face. Hearing Su Xiao's mockery, she didn't refute and just smiled. In Beimeng this kind of appearance could make people's eyes pop out. Su Xiao snorted coldly and said, "If you have something to say, say it. I'm not in the mood to drink the wind and eat the snow with you." The old woman reached out to touch the snow-white hair on her forehead and said with a smile, "Old cripple, how many times have I told you? My surname is Murong, not Murong." Su Xiao said anxiously, "How would I know that a person's surname can have 2 characters? I didn't know in the past and I still won't know in the future." The old woman didn't get angry. She walked a few steps closer and said softly, "There are 10 great clans in the Central Plains during the spring and autumn period. 2 of them have a compound surname. If I remember correctly, they were all defeated by you, Su Xiao. Don't you remember? They were all eaten by you? Su Xiao, oh Su Xiao, you're really old. Fortunately, you've never been handsome in your life. You were like this when you were young and you're even uglier when you're old." Su Xiao laughed and said, "I'm a man. Why should I compare my looks with a woman? Besides, do you think you were good-looking when you were in Liaodong? Compared to my wife, you're worlds apart. Only Beimeng, that old lecher, was blinded by lard and blind with dog eyes. That's why he took a fancy to an ugly woman like you." The old woman was still not the least bit angry. She smiled and said, "When I was young, whether I was good-looking or not, each flower entered their own eyes. It's hard to say, but I really can't be considered ugly. Besides, when a woman is old, she can still look like a little dragonfly with a golden hairpin. It's just that who would believe that the world is still young? Su Xiao, don't you think so?" Su Xiao put his hands in his sleeves and shivered. He said mockingly, "Sour, really sour?" The old woman released her hand from her forehead and spread her hands in front of her. She lowered her head and glanced at them. Then she looked up and stared at the age spots on Su Xiao's face. She calmly said, "We're all old. I'm ugly, you're also hunchbacked. Don't insist on fighting to see who's better. As for me, in this life I've only lost because I'm too focused on winning and losing to myself. That's not good. You're too sentimental. That's not good either. Even if you're a top official, you still don't have a good life. Otherwise, if you were willing to lower yourself to me and come to Beimeng, you wouldn't need to care about anyone's mood. You should know that even I won't give you any face." Su Xiao turned his head and spat heavily into the snow. The Beimeng Empress dismissed it with a smile and said, "There's nothing important to discuss with you. Back then in Liaodong I've already said what I wanted to say. This trip down south is to see Su Xiao before you die. I just want to talk about a small matter. That's why I decided that after you die, I'll first cripple your Bailiang and then go down south. In the end, I'll burn Great Peace City to the ground as incense to your grave." Was this a trivial matter in Fu Yu's casual conversation? Probably even Huang Longshan, the son of the Zhao family, and Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang would feel that it was the biggest joke in the world if they heard it. Su Xiao narrowed his eyes and laughed coldly. "Then Bailiang will wait for you. Don't let the Bailiang cavalry chop you all the way to your nest." The old woman held her stomach and laughed softly. She raised her head and looked at the flying snow. "When we parted in Liaodong, you bought this fur coat for 20 taels of silver. At that time I turned my head twice and only saw your back, Su Xiao. After the 3rd time, I'm not willing to turn my head again. Sometimes I wonder if I'll turn my head again and see you make a face." Su Xiao turned and left. He said calmly, "I won't." A carriage turned and left first, heading south and disappearing into the heavy snow of the north. The old woman stood where she was and remained silent. When the coachman was about to persuade her, he heard the Beimeng Empress angrily say, "Shut up." The old woman covered her face with both hands. Her expression couldn't be seen clearly. The wind and snow sobbed like a woman crying. The old woman let go of her hands and raised her slender arms to tidy up her white sideburns. She laughed softly and said, "I don't know where the human face is, but the peach blossoms are still laughing like a stray dog." The carriage headed south. Su Fengyan slowly drove the horse. He had nothing to do, so he stuffed a piece of snow into his mouth. Su Xiao asked him for more, but Su Fengyan ignored him. Su Xiao rubbed his cheeks and said with a smile, "It's not right to bring your son to see an old woman who misses her father." Su Fengyan didn't say anything. Su Xiao reached out and gently placed his hand on Su Fengyan's shoulder. He didn't say anything either. After a long time, Su Fengyan said firmly, "I can handle it." Chapter 977. The successful hereditary succession meant that there was a new vassal king in the Liang dynasty. Other than the coronation of the crown prince and the ascension of the new emperor, there was nothing more important than this. Moreover, this new vassal king was the king of Bailiang. Not only Liangzhou, but Yuling and Liangzhou were also decorated with lanterns and colored banners. The atmosphere was almost crazy. It was even more grand than the lantern market during the lantern festival to curry favor with the new king. In particular, those tyrannical families were secretly competing with each other to see which family had the largest number of lanterns. It was as if whoever dared to put up fewer lanterns would be exposed the next day and then dragged out to be beheaded. The result of the constant competition was that there were more and more festive red lanterns hanging in the house that didn't lack money. There were so many that people's eyes turned red and they felt sick of it. The prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang didn't have much of a fuss. The lanterns were added at the last minute, but it was much simpler than in previous years. However, the stewards and servants of the mansion were all happy and walked a little more briskly. These people were naturally happy. Who didn't want the new master of the mansion to be successful? When one person achieves the Tao, all his chickens and dogs will ascend to heaven. If the new king of the prince's mansion couldn't control Bailiang, it would become a situation where the guests bullied the masters. Everyone in the prince's mansion wouldn't have any good days. After the father and son of the Su family returned to Liangzhou from the border, they could often see the young master, who was now called Prince Liang, walking around the mansion with the general. The sharp-eyed and attentive people secretly counted on their fingers to see which of the two future princesses accompanied the father and son more times. Later, they simply didn't care about it because the number of times the Lu family woman of Qingzhou visited could be counted on one's fingers. Wang Dongxiang lost to that female literary master too many times. However, from time to time, they would bump into the daughter of the Lu family helping second commandery princess push the wheelchair. But when comparing the two, how could the people in the mansion not know which was more important? Moreover, in their hearts, they didn't like the woman of the Lu family who lived in seclusion. She stank of money. Didn't she rely on her family's wealth to luckily enter the prince's mansion? Back then, Lin Quan was just a pawn who carried the flag. Everything he had was given to the Lu family by the general out of charity. Mount Qingliang had sent clever maidservants to serve the two young women. For a long time, the maidservants who worked in Wang Dongxiang's courtyard looked down on the maidservants in Lu Qingyan's courtyard. The maidservants of the prince's mansion in Lu courtyard had internal strife and began to look askance at the maidservants who were outsiders brought into the mansion by the Lu family. Since ancient times, when there were many women, everywhere would become muddy water. It had been less than half a day since they returned from the border. Today, the two generations of the Su family, except for Huang Manor, who was practicing martial arts, were all gathered in the pavilion on Tide Hark Lake to rest. Compared to before, there were more Wang Chudong and Lu Qingyan, the two future daughters-in-law who were about to marry into the Su family. In addition, there was also Su Weisheng, who was in a wheelchair, and Su Longxiang was missing. With the decline of one party and the rise of the other, there was a bit of a yin overabundance and a yang decline. However, it could be seen that Su Zhao's complexion was excellent. He was in high spirits, presumably because he was satisfied with both of his daughters-in-law. One of them was famous for her talent, while the other was born with a sense of propriety. Most importantly, the two women didn't show any signs of jealousy. This was because one didn't understand anything while the other was too smart to do anything. With them guarding the inner residence, there wouldn't be any trouble, and it wouldn't be difficult for an upright official to distinguish right from wrong. Su Xiao, who had deviated from the orthodoxy and removed his identity as Prince Liang without authorization, leaned lazily against the red pillar of the pavilion. He listened to Su Fengyan and Master Wang's conversation. Their witty banter made the old man laugh incessantly. When the little girl from the Wang family said, "How many worries can a gentleman have?" Su Fengyan added, "It seems like he lacks money to buy the green ant wine." Wang Chudong smiled and his eyes narrowed into a pair of crescent moons. When he asked, suddenly looking back, Su Fengyan replied, "That fellow is climbing a tree." The female literary prodigy said, "His belt is gradually loosening, but he still doesn't regret it." The young man, who had already become the most powerful vassal of Liang, smiled and said, "Go fetch a vat of water for the widow." The woman sitting quietly in the wheelchair, who was even more literary prodigy than Wang Chudong, also had a subtle and warm smile on her face. Lu Qingyan, who had been carefully nurtured by the aristocratic family, smiled without showing her teeth. When she couldn't help it, she would raise her hand to cover it. However, even a person with poor eyesight could tell where Wang Chudong was. He naturally stood close to Su Xiao and Su Fengyan. Lu Qingyan, on the other hand, could only side with Second Commandery Princess, who was in charge of the Hanlin Academy of Red Women. Su Xiao smiled and said, "Nian send Qingyan out. I'll talk to your sister and Chudong." Su Fengyan nodded and walked out of the pavilion with Lu Qingyan, who stood up. However, they didn't speak on the way to the courtyard. Lu Qingyan pursed her lips and followed behind him. When they turned around at the entrance of the courtyard, she was already smiling at him. Su Fengyan wanted to say something but stopped. After hesitating for a moment, he chuckled and said, "Remember to go out and relax more. It's not good to always be cooped up at home. Beiyang's scenery isn't as beautiful as Jiangnan's, but the north also has its own unique scenery. It'll be a pity if you don't ride a horse and see it yourself. I should be accompanying you, but I'm tied up with work right now and can't be lazy. Furthermore, I'll have to go out very soon to clean up the mess caused by the 200,000 refugees. If you're still in the mood when I come back, I'll take you to Mount Wudong." Lu Qingyan's eyes became charming after her heartfelt joy. She had just blurted out the word "feng," when she quickly swallowed back the word "nian" that was supposed to follow. She said softly, "King of Beiyang, you don't have to be so polite." Su Fengyan made a gesture as if he was going to knock her on the forehead. He said with a helpless expression, "Tell me honestly, who's more polite?" Lu Qingyan curled the corners of her mouth. Su Fengyan smiled and turned around. When he turned around again, he saw her standing at the door with her hands twisted in her sleeves. He waved at her and then left. Su Fengyan didn't see Su Xiao at Tide Listening Lake, so he walked towards the mausoleum of Wang Fei, which had always been cold and cheerless. He walked quietly into the mausoleum that was said to be more solemn than the vassal kings. He reached out his hand and drew across the stone statues with solemn postures. At the end of the mausoleum, there was a hunchbacked old man sitting in front of a tombstone. There were very few ancient trees in the mausoleum. It was rumored in Beiyang that it was because the sword aura of the sword fairy's mother was too strong. Even after she passed away, she still had the vigorous aura of a sword fairy. Therefore, there weren't many ancient trees left in the mausoleum of Wang Fei. When Su Fengyan was young, he heard that after becoming an immortal, he could cast beams to form soldiers and even bring people back to life. During that period of time, he read through almost all the ancient texts of Buddhism and Taoism in the Tide Listening Pavilion. Afterwards, he was scolded badly by his master, Li Yishan, who had never believed in ghosts and gods. It seemed that even if he wanted to be scolded, no one would scold him anymore. In the future, no one would dare to scold him, the king of Beiyang, Su Fengyan. Su Xiao heard the footsteps and said with a smile, "You're here." He didn't say anything else. At this moment, the family of three was here. He was standing, Su Xiao was sitting, and the king of Beiyang was lying down. Su Fengyan didn't show any grief. He only stood silently in front of the tombstone. It was early spring, and the branches of the ancient trees were light yellow and light green. Su Fengyan walked under the tree and reached out to pluck a leaf. He played the ballad of the spring goddess that his mother had taught him when he was young. If he hummed the lyrics, then the general meaning was that a country girl left home and went down the mountain. She met a man she liked and they grew old together. The hunchbacked old man closed his eyes and listened to the little tune that he couldn't be more familiar with. One of his hands leisurely tapped the beat on his knee. After the little ballad, father and son silently walked out of the mausoleum. Su Xiao suddenly said, "Nian, you can let Huang Manor go home now." Su Fengyan bit his lip. He stopped and quickly followed, nodding his head. In Great Peace City, there was still the lingering charm of the Lantern Festival. The streets were full of people. In the palace, after the head eunuch Han Xianxia suddenly died in the royal palace, Song Tonglu of the Great Martin Temple took over as the head eunuch of the Great Martin Temple. He was so young that it was frightening. In the first year of the auspicious talisman, the Great Martin Temple's Song Tonglu of the Great Martin Temple had all come from him. It was watertight. Originally, he had very good relations with the people of the 12 directorates. After he resigned from the Internal Officials Directorate, he focused on handling the duties of the head eunuch of the Ceremony Directorate. He gradually distanced himself from many of the old eunuchs who had worked their way up to the title of Mink Temple. As a result, Song Tonglu didn't even go to the master who had given him his name. Since he had entered the palace and become a eunuch, he had to respect his master far more than his father. This was an unshakable rule. The reputation that Song Tonglu had worked so hard to build was like water in a copper hourglass. Drip, 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 there would be a day when it would run out. However, Song Tonglu, who seemed extremely intelligent, did not care. Today he carefully followed the father and son to the tall building. The Imperial Observatory was a place where prophecies would be passed down every few years. These prophecies were all solemnly written on gold talisman paper and placed in an ancient yellow box that had been passed down by the Zhao family for 100 years. In the end, it was given to the emperor after he had bathed and changed his clothes. After he finished reading it, the emperor had to personally burn it to ashes. Chapter 978. After Song Tonglu became the head eunuch, 2 hours ago was the first time in his life that he brought back a clay box from the imperial astronomer. After that, the emperor rushed to the imperial astronomer expressionlessly. However, Song Tonglu, who had been serving the emperor for many years, knew that ever since he saw the emperor, he had never clearly sensed that the emperor was so happy. When they went to the tall building this time, the emperor called for His Highness the Crown Prince. Outside the building there was a group of people of varying heights, old and young. After the death of the old eunuch, the one who took over the imperial astronomer was not the prestigious Lord Jianghu, but a young child. In the past, the old eunuch had nicknamed him Little Bookshelf. Everyone inside and outside the imperial astronomer had followed suit and called him Little Bookshelf, forgetting the child's original name. Other than the eunuch, who was supposed to be at the age of a private school, and the highly respected Chehu Song Yujing, there was also a new nobleman in the capital, the Prince of Qingqing Wu Lingsu, who wore a purple Taoist robe. Now this prince with a different surname, other than Su Xiao, was the Taoist leader of the northern Taoist sections. Like Zhao Danping, he was also a Taoist minister. No one dared to laugh at him for being a prince with a different surname. Especially when Liang carried out a large-scale extermination of Buddhism, the northern Buddhist sects experienced a catastrophe. Wu Lingsu did not disappoint the emperor. He personally went to the two Zen temples and pasted the talisman that sealed off the mountain on the main gate. The survival of the tens of thousands of temples in the north was in Wu Lingsu's hands. Even though the two Taoist masters of Mount Longhu had ascended, Wu Lingsu was still aggressive in dealing with the Guangling Taoist and Buddhist temples that bordered the north and south. Mount Longhu could only retreat step by step. Under the gaze of everyone in the world, the nobleman of the Taoist master residence, who shared the same surname as the emperor, was extremely dejected. However, when he saw the emperor and His Highness the Crown Prince, he still respectfully knelt down. The other members of the imperial astronomer originally followed the usual practice of standing and bowing with their hands clasped in front. However, when they saw the emperor and His Highness the Crown Prince, they could only kneel down and kowtow to the emperor. Only the little supervisor did not bend his knees. The emperor of the Zhao family was not angry. Instead, he was very happy. Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan even quickly walked up and pinched the child's cheeks. The supervisor, who was nicknamed the Little Bookcase, was somewhat annoyed. Seeing this, the emperor laughed heartily. After retracting his smile, he entered the building first. When they arrived at the heaven-connecting platform on the top floor, Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan strolled around in front of the bookcase that required a ladder to reach the books above. Wu Lingsu and Song Yujing carefully accompanied him. However, His Highness the Crown Prince was famous in Great Peace City for being easygoing and good-natured, so Wu Lingsu and Song Yujing were not too reserved. When the Crown Prince joked that he liked daughters more, he asked Wu Lingsu, who had once used her bedroom techniques to flatter the officials in the capital, if there was a way for the first child to be a daughter instead of a son. This left the Prince of Qingqing tongue-tied. He didn't know how to answer. The old-fashioned Song Yujing smiled knowingly. She thought that His Highness the Crown Prince truly had the heart of a child. It was not easy to have such an heir. Outside the building, there was a star-picking path made of 81 pieces of white marble. It abruptly extended 60 feet from the building. The emperor of the Zhao family and the little supervisor were walking in front of each other on the spotlessly white beam of heaven and earth. The spirited child seemed to have no fear of this middle-aged man sitting in the dragon chair. The emperor did not mind this small matter at all. There were too many people in the world who were willing to be his cows, horses, or dogs. Having one or two people who were not afraid of him and did not pose any threat to him was not a bad thing but a good thing. There were people in the world who were not afraid of him at all. The nearby ones were the little bookcase. As for the distant ones, not to mention the Beimang barbarians, the Liang court, and the common people, they could be counted with one hand. Among the numbers, there was only one person who could make him afraid. And this guy was about to die. How could he not want to laugh? He held his belly and laughed. The emperor of the Zhao family pointed to the northwest of the dynasty and then withdrew his clenched fist. He bent over and held his belly, but he suppressed his laughter and looked straight at the roof of a hall. There, 3 people had once drunk wine and talked about heroes. Together, they had created the great hegemony of the Liang dynasty. In the end, they all died. It was good that they died. If the oldest one did not die, he would not be able to ascend the throne. That bald donkey died at the Iron Gate. It was a worthy death, but it was a pity. The last one who was about to lie in the coffin chose to watch coldly when the princes fought for the throne. This made the emperor of the Zhao family even more resentful. In his opinion, this old guy died too late. The emperor of the Zhao family turned around and touched Jianzheng's head. He smiled and asked, "Little bookcase, do you think it is more appropriate to give him a good title or an evil one?" One was safe, the other was appropriate. Accompanying the emperor was like accompanying a tiger. If it were those old foxes who had spent most of their lives in court trying to figure out the emperor's heart, they would immediately be able to understand the true meaning of the emperor's words. However, the little bookcase said, Grandpa Jianzheng said before his death that once the new calendar of the imperial astronomer came out, we robbed the white-robed monk of the 2 Zen temple's almanac. Whether the king of Bailiang is given an evil title or an evil one is no longer relevant to the big picture. I feel that since the sages said that a gentleman has the beauty to help others, giving him an evil title is also fine. But Uncle Emperor, what does robbing mean? In the end, the Zhao family's son of heaven revealed a warm smile. He muttered to himself and then he raised his voice, saying with a laugh, "Robbing? It was your grandpa Jianzheng's old enemy Huang Longshi who said it first. I think it's similar to robbing in Go." "Right, little bookcase, Zhen heard that you are skilled at Go. When will you compete with Zhen on the Go board?" The little bookcase thought and then said with a bright smile, "Grandpa Jianzheng taught me the 5 moves of attacking, defending, ending and turning the tables. I know the first 4 but I don't know how to turn the tables. However, Grandpa Jianzheng said that there is no rush. When I understand, I can call old Huang to come to Great Peace City to discuss. Grandpa Jianzheng also said that if we want Huang Sanjia to lose one of his jades, only 2 people have a chance. I am one of them." Looking at the child pointing at himself innocently, the emperor of the Zhao family was very happy. He took off a jade pendant at his waist that could be called priceless. He smiled and said, "Then Zhen will not seek humiliation. This jade pendant is for you and it is fine to give it to someone else. Zhen's Liang really does have many talents. Huang Longshi, this madman, should have no one to rely on and die without a grave." The little bookcase laughed and held the jade pendant with both hands. "Then I have seen a palace attendant Jejia. I liked her at first glance. If I see her again, I will give this jade pendant to her." The Liang Ming emperor who had won the title of the previous emperors through his diligence smiled. He nodded and said, "Uncle Emperor is telling you, the jade pendant has to be given to her when you grow up. Then you will have a wife. Don't worry, Zhen will first find that palace attendant for you and keep her for you." The little bookcase pecked like a chicken and nodded vigorously. With the spring breeze caressing his face, the son of the Zhao family turned around and walked towards the attic with a cold smile on his face. According to the law of Liang, posthumous titles were bestowed. Beautiful posthumous titles were divided into civil and military officials, with characters at the beginning, and then the character Zheng at the beginning followed by the characters Zhen, Zhong, Duan, Kang Yi, and so on. The posthumous titles of military officials were on the lower side, the number of characters was also fewer, but they were still divided into 18 ranks. Therefore, there were 2 sayings: scholars should be bestowed 24 titles and men of character should be bestowed 18 titles. In the past few years, most of the court officials who died were civil officials. Although these old people were not so exaggerated as to receive posthumous titles such as Zheng, Zhen, Zhong and Duan, but in the eyes of the world, they could not escape the title of Zheng, Zhen, Zhong and Duan. For example, the 2 masters of the Song family as well as the leader of the Green Party who had experienced 3 dynasties, Shangzhu Guolu Fei Qi, were among the posthumous titles. Unfortunately, these fellows' integrity could not be preserved in their later years. Although they were among the 24, their posthumous titles were extremely low. On the contrary, the Lu family, whose family's prestige was far inferior to the Song family's Gangnamdu Ling Lang and Man of Jade, had the highest chance of obtaining 2 of these great posthumous titles. Su Shao. Zhen will not give you any evil posthumous titles, but you have long been stripped of your title of de Zhugua. Therefore, as a military official, you can forget about receiving a civil posthumous title. Moreover, as a military official, Zhen will, generously, give you the lowest rank of Wu Li. After you die, no matter how timid the fence-sitter is, they will use their mocking laughter to send Su Shao off for the last time. That night, the prince's mansion of Mount Qingliang, who was used to the old Prince Liang's tiredness, did not have any abnormalities. They even felt that when they woke up tomorrow, they might be able to see the old man and the young Prince Liang strolling together in the distance.